Hello and welcome to the opening day of competition in the French National Road Championships, brought to you in the north of France, all centred on the hilltop finish of Cassel and the Mont Cassel. All the way through to Sunday, of course, we'll be bringing you the women's road race on Saturday, the men's road race on Sunday. But today, it's me, Jez Cox, and I am alongside Michael Hutchinson, and we are bringing you the first of two national championship time trials for France today, and that is the elite women first. I will be kicked out, and Carlton Kirby will be in with Dr. Hutch for the men's time trial after this. And there we look at the results of the last few years, utterly dominated by one rider, Audrey Cordon-Ragot, who of course has won this title 6 times, and last year won both the time trial title and the road race title in Cholet. Juliette Labou is not here. She was second last year, the DSM rider, but she's chosen to focus just on the road race this time. Séverine Heroux is here, though, and she will pose a threat to Audrey Cordon-Ragot, who, despite the fact she's won this title 6 times, it's always tiny margins. A wonderful opportunity today in what could be quite interesting conditions. It might throw a few spanners in the works, maybe. Everything's going to have to go right for Audrey Cordon-Ragot to get things right today. At the age of 33, she is still the big favourite. The course for both the men and the women is exactly the same. It starts in Hazebrouck and works its way northwards, all the way northwards through one timing point in Saint-Sylvestre-Capelle, and then goes into Steenvoorde, reminding us of the Flemish origins of this region. Then turns back on itself to go through another timing point just outside Le Coucou, coming into the eastern edge of Cassel, goes around that climb there on the edge of Cassel, and then ramps straight up for the final kilometre to finish on the rattly clinkers on the Grand Place of Cassel in the middle. It's the same finish line that's being used for the for the road races, I should say. And as a reminder, I'm pleased to say, and this is exactly the way it should be, it's exactly the same course, exactly the same distance for the elite men and the elite women. We even have a feed zone to pick up a little baguette, maybe a small sliver of brie, something like that en route. I do enjoy seeing a feed zone in a race of this distance. 31.3 kilometres is actually longer than the men's and women's French National Championship has been for some years. I wonder if that distance will make any difference. We're very close to seeing the first rider rolling out, and that's Enora Augier of the Lannister Women's Morbihan team. In actual fact, she should have been rolling out just a few moments ago, so hopefully she's en route. I'm pleased to say, as we look down on the start ramp, that I'm joined by someone who's probably won more national time trial titles than possibly any living person on Earth. His name, of course, is Dr. Michael Hutchinson. Hey, Hutch, how you doing?
Oh, I'm good. Looking forward to an afternoon of French time trialling. I do enjoy this, but I love the idea of spending an afternoon watching this. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. The time gaps, by the way, in case you're wondering at home, folks, 1 minute and 30 seconds. So 90-second time gaps between all the riders. This not being a stage race, there's no longer gaps between the last 10 or so riders. It's the same for everyone, 90-second gaps between them. Hutch, is that a standard thing for national champs? I don't know. I'm sure you'll know that. I was thinking it would be minute, but 90 seconds. Is that common?
It varies. It's usually got to do with how much time they've allotted for the race, how many riders they've got. Bigger gaps are easier to deal with on the road. There's part of this course that is a couple of parts of this course actually that are very, very narrow, that I was looking at last night and thinking I would not like to be having to get one team car past another team car on some of these bits of road. So they just kind of, I think, stretch it out a bit just to make life a bit simpler for the logistics out, in the middle of the race.
Yeah. This is the first of our UCI team riders to roll out. This is Margot Pompenon of the Saint-Michel Mavic Aubert 93. The jersey I like to call the nicest jersey in world cycling. It's a sort of egg yolk yellow and orange of the Saint-Michel Mavic Aubert 93. We would expect her potentially to set probably the fastest time early on, but let's see. They've apparently, from what I can tell, been working on their time trial positions, that team, for both the men and the women over the course of the last year. And their women's team has been particularly successful this last year, actually, to a certain extent, in the very biggest races, outshining the men. They actually race at a higher level than the UCI Continental level men's Saint-Michel Mavic Aubert 93 team. And it's worth pointing out, if this is your first time joining us here at Homer Cycling at Eurosport GCN to watch a French National Championship, in the women's race in particular, there are a lot of amateurs still riding this race. Elite amateurs who race at a very high level in the Coupe de France races and French UCI races. But the first sort of half of the field is made up of some part-time riders, some professional full-time riders, and as we get deeper into the final 15-20 riders of the 46 starters we have here in this elite time trial championship, we get into the professional riders who are racing on the world scene. Of course, the highest ranked of those, and ranked I think 16th currently, if I'm looking, remember, no, 14th I should say, on the UCI World Rankings for the road. It's Audrey Cordon-Ragot. This is the next of our starters. This is Amélie Ratignier of the Lyon Sprint Evolution, French club-based team that I know relatively well because one of the riders I've been coaching for the last few years made his way over there. English rider, Jack Parrish from the eastern region of England, and is absolutely loving it there. Spoken very highly of what a great development network they have within that team for both the men, the women, the under 23s, the juniors, and a nice spirit amongst all of their riders as well, by all accounts, from what I've been told. So Hutch, what have we got to expect weather-wise? Because I think you hinted at this when we spoke about it earlier. There's the potential for rain here, isn't there? And that is always going to spell jeopardy, but it's not necessarily that predictable, is it?
There's probably going to be rain. According to the forecast, there's likely to be rain at some point this afternoon. It's overcast. It's sort of 20, 21 degrees. More relevant maybe for a lot of the riders is that there is a moderate northerly, and this course finishes a fair distance north of where it started, particularly these, as soon as we get out of the town. We're looking at the town at the minute, but as soon as we get kind of out and onto the big straight road that goes north towards Steenvoorde, you know, that's going to be into the teeth of a northerly breeze. That's some of the kind of the good time trialists are going to get an advantage out of that. The slightly weaker riders are going to get a disadvantage out of it. The other thing about it, it's place to place course. So of course you might get a stronger breeze than somebody else. The wind might go up in the afternoon, it might go down, so you've also got to bear that in mind. Rain wise, it's not a technical course. So yeah, if it's wet and soggy, it's going to slow you down a little bit, but not in practice all that much. We've got a lot of long, straight, fairly flat roads. Even the sections through the towns are relatively straightforward. There's one very tricky corner at the bottom of the absolutely final climb. You go down a descent and turn a very, very sharp right. We'll see it when we get there, and then up into this very, very steep, very narrow climb up to the finish. But that's the weather.
Let's see, let's keep an eye on that. We'll watch out for the spots of rain on the camera lens. This is one of those long straight roads out to Saint-Sylvestre-Capelle. It won't be too long before we get the first timing point through there and see our leading times through there. It is 7 kilometres in, that first timing point. The next one is 17.5 kilometres, and the final one on the edge of Cassel itself comes with 25 kilometres to go. In fact, all three of them, rather appropriately, come on the top of the only three kind of slight rises that we have. In fact, you can see in front of Oceane Gauthier here with the number 44 on her back. She is riding up to that first timing point, which comes atop that little rise there. And this is Sylvia Leglu. What's that? Sixth rider off after the start, riding for the Lanester Women's Morbihan team. French teams, by the way, folks, are split into effectively 3 different divisions at the elite level. There are the UCI Continental teams, of which we have plenty represented here and in the road race on Saturday. And then beneath them, there's National 1 and National 2. And teams have to secure a certain number of points at national level in order to survive up there as well. Just watching Sylvia Leglu rolling out there. The Lanester Women's Morbihan team is one of the National 1 teams, and it's pretty competitive for these club teams to stay in that upper division, in Division 1 as well. Hutch, we were talking on air off air, just before we came on air, about what kind of times we think these women might be doing, and it's very tricky to tell. For 31.3 kilometres, I mentioned it's the longest it's been for a while, but we think somewhere in the region of just under 40 minutes, maybe.
Somewhere in there. I mean, the note I'd scribbled down was 38 to 40 minutes, and that's a pretty broad margin. So I mean, with a bit of luck, I'll get somebody in there somewhere along the line. And it's all the harder to predict, just with a little bit of a northerly breeze, which will slow it down a bit. So maybe the times will be a tiny bit slower than that. But you can see there are lots of kind of wide straight roads with a reasonable road surface. So yep, there's a bit of a nagging northerly breeze, but there's no reason not to roll quite quickly. And particularly we get to the northern sections of the course, it becomes a bit more sheltered. So we might find that kind of second half of the course is going to run a little bit quicker. Although it's also where there aren't a lot of hills. I think we've got 370 meters of climbing in the whole race, so it's not a hilly race. But whatever lumps and bumps there are, they are all really effectively all in that last 10 kilometers or so.
Folks at home, I'm sure you'll agree with me to say it's absolutely lovely to hear Dr. Michael Hutchinson back here at the Home of Cycling with us. The last time he and I were together was actually for Filippo Ganna's hour record, and we were sat next to each other in the sweaty heat of the Grenchen Velodrome in Switzerland, end of last summer, of course. And we've barely spoken really since then, Hutch, have we? But it's nice to be back on air with you. What an incredible evening that was. Of course, it was shown live here at the Home of Cycling on Eurosport GCN. But we were treated to such a wonderful evening together that day. Weren't we, Grenchen?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you. I felt really very, very lucky to be there to witness that, because that was one of the, in any kind of era there are a handful of properly epic rides. You think about Tadej Pogačar on Planche Belfi a couple of years ago. I'd love to have seen that. I wasn't there, but I was there to see somebody riding everything but 57 kilometers in the hour record, which, we know how good Ganna was. We knew we were expecting something special, but it just built and built and built. It was absolutely thrilling. People sort of say, how can it possibly be that exciting to watch a man ride around a track for an hour? But it was just tremendous.
It was a great production by our team, but also by the Ineos Grenadiers as well, who put the whole project together. It was fantastic. If you haven't seen it, by the way, go and watch it back, because it was wonderful. And Hutch's insight into the aerodynamics, the pacing, power and everything was really insightful too. As you'd expect, we have our first fastest time at the first timing point, and it is our first rider, Enora Auger. She's gone through there in 11 minutes and 16 seconds as she was first off the ramp. It will be interesting to see how much catching, I guess, we have going on in this race, Hutch, with 90-second gaps. It's always much more likely when they're a minute, but 90 seconds, I'm sure there'll be some catching going on, knowing the kind of the breadth of different time trialling abilities we have amongst these 46 riders.
Oh, there will be. And of course, what they try to do in a race like this is seed it more or less from slowest to fastest, which ought to minimize the amount of catching. But in practice, an awful lot of the riders we've got today, they don't ride an enormous number of time trials. Here in the UK, there are a lot of time trials. If you want to see the time trial field for national championships in the UK, you've got quite a lot to work with. A lot of these riders will ride 1, maybe 2 time trials in a year, so actually producing that seeding is very difficult, so that it produces catching, which on most of the course is going to be fine. As I've said earlier, there are 1 or 2 narrow bits where that might actually get quite tricky. So that'll possibly be something to look forward to.
Just watched Victoire Joncheret of the Team Grand Est Commuji La Fabrique, in fact, the longest team name, thankfully, in amongst these UCI women's teams. She's the third, in actual fact, of our UCI team-based riders, because they've spread these riders out a little bit, based, as Michael said, on their previous time trial performances.
And there's also the issue of getting your team car back from the finish to the start, which means the kind of the big teams, even the relatively big teams, if they've got a lot of riders in the race, as this team has, they do have to spread them out so that they can get the car and the coaches back. So one of the things that annoys teams is if you have a place-to-place time trial like this, is that the first thing you need to do when you get to the finish is you've got to drive. In this instance, I think you've got to drive about 12 kilometres back to the start to pick up your next rider. It's the same for the TV motorbikes.
I'm going to avoid in the first, tell me off and tell me to shut up, Hutch, if I do this, but I'm not going to keep rattling through all the latest new times at our first timing check, because at the moment they're not that important. But our second rider, Oceane Gauthier, has gone through there now with the fastest, third fastest time. Enora Auger still leads, because I think I'm looking at we did have another UCI rider, and Hutch has made a very good point about the spreading out of team cars. Ines van der Linden was third off, and she has gone through fastest. And just as soon as I say it, Margot Pompinon now has the fastest time, the Saint-Michel Mavic Ovel 93 rider there. She is having just gone through that first timing point. Now, we're going to see an awful lot of those on the left-hand side, enormous puppet-like figures. They're not all the same. Most of them originate from the enormous Easter Monday Carnival that happens on top of the hill, on top of Mont Cassel, where we are right now, right up in the north of France. The most famous of them, and we will look out for them because they'll be on one of the roundabouts, probably just before we turn back towards Cassel. And they are Ruse Maman et Ruse Papa. Ruse in French means giant. And I'll explain the legend now. I did explain it to viewers who watched the 4 Days of Dunkirk just a few weeks ago. I'll explain it again in case we see them. These are two enormous puppet-like figures which represent the legendary mother and father figures of the giants, who, legend has it, were carrying two enormous pails of earth to go and build a hill in the north of France. They happened to trip just before where Cassel is right now and spill a little bit of their pail of earth. That spillage is Mont Cassel. that's where the riders will be finishing today, on top of the hill. So I've got that one out of the way.
So that's the actual geological explanation, is it?
That's it, correct, yes. Yes, you can wiki it, and you'll find an entry probably written by me. It's worth pointing out, I just mentioned that we raced up here a few weeks ago in the 4 Days of Dunkirk, which of course is not the 4 Days of Dunkirk, it's 6 days long, and the stage which finishes in Cassel has now become a very firm fixture in that race, for the men this is, I should say, and that Queen stage on the Saturday, that fifth stage, always finishes on top of Cassel with multiple circuits of it. And this year it was a really useful preview for the national champs. Slightly different run-in, but it did take the cobbled side in, coming from the north, which is where our road races finish this weekend. And on that occasion, it produced really a really exciting finish. It was the Jumbo-Visma rider, Johannes Storn. No, do you know what? I'm talking absolute nonsense. It was. It's not Stornemit yet. I'm going to have to look that up, you know, Hutch. You know what? I haven't got my notes for that in front of me. It was. Yes, I have. It was Perstrand Hagenes, his teammate, the Norwegian teenager for Jumbo-Visma, who jumped clear coming back into Cassel, used the ramp, because the ramp up both sides of Mont Cassel is pretty tough, and we'll see just how tough this finale is today in the time trial. It was coming in from the opposite direction. He jumped clear with another, well, almost teenager, 20-year-old Romain Grégoire of Groupama FDJ. And those two sprinted it out together, and in the end, Perstrand Hagenes, really exciting Norwegian, took the win. But it was enough of a hill, the Mont Cassel, to make a really big difference on that occasion. We were talking just before we came on air, weren't we, Hutch, about how this is quite unusual in that the French Cycling Federation have chosen to use what is effectively, what do you call it, an omloop. It's effectively one big lap. It's not enormous though, is it? They're riding north, as we are here, from Asbrook, where all the starts are for these French championships, road and time trial, and then doing multiple laps of this circuit around Cassel. It's going to be a very attritional affair, isn't it?
It's a very short circuit. I've forgotten how many laps the women's road race is doing. I did notice the men's road race is going to do 17 laps. So they ride essentially from Asbrook to the circuit and then ride 17 laps of, I think it's 13 kilometres. It's a very small.
Yes, it's 13K.
It's a very small lap, which in some ways is quite a nice. In some ways is quite a nice way to race because you get so familiar with it. You know, and if you're not in a position to do kind of a particularly detailed recce of the course, you can take your first 10 laps as a course familiarization and worry about racing in the last 7. But it's going to be tough because it's cobbled, it's quite steep. It's going to be a real on again, off again road race. And actually a real kind of contrast with this, because this time trial is a very kind of steady state, judging your pace type time trial. It's not a punchy on again, off again bike race, apart from, as I say, we've got that final climb, which the potential to get that final climb wrong, because it's a little bit more than a kilometre. It's 1 in 10 average thereabouts. It gets steeper towards the top. So yeah, you could certainly find your way to losing 10 or 15 seconds on that if you judge it incorrectly.
Yeah, let's see. We've got that to look forward to. If we can look forward to seeing people fall apart, I think we can. It's kind of what we do for a living. Focusing here on Margot Pompinon because she is expected to be setting the early pace out there. As one of the stronger time trialists that's off earlier on. And yeah, Michael made an interesting point there, folks at home, about the relaying of team cars. And it has to be said, particularly for a national championship, not all of these riders will have a team car that can get back in time. So some of them will be relying on cars from the organisation itself. And of course, when you have that, you haven't necessarily got someone you trust and know behind you shouting you on, or being ready to do a bike swap when you need it. National champs are a funny one,
there's also quite a lot of riders in the early stretch of this race, to be honest, aren't going to have a spare bike anyway. They certainly won't have, a lot of them won't have a spare time trial bike. So if they have a bike problem, that's pretty much their day done. So for them, maybe it's not so critical. But there are certainly, you know, amateur riders in the early stretch of this race who will be very, very keen to get a good ride in. And those kind of logistics, running a race like this, I always think the logistics of it can make life a little bit difficult for the amateur teams who haven't got the resources. But it's nice in some ways to spread the race out over kind of 2 towns, and it's become more and more common. I mean, the last few World Championships, I'm thinking, have generally had at least an element of place to place, even if it hasn't been a dead straight line. There was one in Tuscany, 2013 in Tuscany, that was a ruler straight 50 kilometres into Florence. It just started 50 kilometres from Florence and went in a dead straight line to Florence, went round 3 sharp corners and finished, and that was it.
I quite like that.
Yeah,
I quite like the
even I thought that was a bit dull.
Well, I think I definitely prefer it from starting and finishing in exactly the same place. Much as it's nice to kind of purify the fan experience of seeing them leave and then seeing them come back in, there's something about the journey of pacing it out. And actually, particularly, I do particularly like not doing multiple laps in a time trial. The idea being that you've got to get everything right across that measured course, not just the distance, but the actual course where you only ever take in everything once. There's something about that, I don't know, the adventuring spirit of the journey that I quite like. This is Emmeline Courtauld of the VC Moto Mont Benoit. They are one of our Division 1 teams in France, in the black with the pinky stripes. It's all these little things, Hutch, that you touch on that I have to remind myself of, because these are the specialist time trialist things. We talked about the weather, we talked about the fact that the riders are expecting a headwind all the way out, and you immediately said to me, which of course is that would be good. And I found myself as a bit of a lazy cyclist now, in particular, I think, thinking, good, what do you mean good? And then of course I'm thinking, yes, of course, for the specialists, for those who've really honed their positions and are looking to make the most of their aerodynamics and their capacity, their ability on the time trial bike. Of course, you want a raging headwind all the way up there, don't you?
Some will and some won't, actually. It is kind of a personal thing. The riders who have worked hard on their aerodynamics, worked hard on their equipment and position, will be very happy to have a headwind, because it's almost like it makes the race a little bit longer. It makes the aerodynamics of the whole thing a little bit more important. So if you're a time trial specialist, it gives you a little bit of an advantage over the non-specialist. On a course like this, that's actually, it's something you would look for, because of course we've got that last climb where there's an opportunity for a climber who's kept a little bit in reserve to maybe pick up 10-15 seconds on that last climb over a kind of a bigger rouleur type time trial specialist. So this, in some respects, the weather conditions today are going to give the pure time trialists a little bit back, which the pure time trialists will like and the climbers won't, obviously.
This is Marie Desonde of the team group Abadi, one of our UCI teams. We'll cut back to her kit at some point and have a look at her. We keep going back to Margot Pompinon, who's setting all the fastest, has set the fastest time at our first timing check. Anyway, she'll be getting a little bit closer to that second one as she goes northward through Steenvoorde and northwestward to high point of our course. Once they turn through Le Temple, they turn left, go a little bit more in the direction of Cassel, and they'll go through a timing checkpoint, which is just before a left-hand turn. Looking to see the distance she's done so far. It's 10 kilometres further on from that first turning point, where she is the leader currently. 9 riders have gone through there so far, and Margot Pompinon the fastest of them with 10 minutes and 47 seconds. You'll remember that Hutch and I have kind of hedged our bets and estimated somewhere between 37 and 40 minutes will be.
I mean, I honestly don't know why we didn't
times.
say between 35 and 45 and be confident of getting it right. It's actually, it's surprisingly difficult to predict how long a time trial is going to take. You would think with all the technology and all the modelling we've got, it'd be very straightforward. And there are still a lot of variables.
Yes, absolutely. And that's just us talking about it. The riders themselves will have been working it out amongst themselves, although I suspect probably most of them will have gone and ridden bits of the course, certainly maybe the second half, depending on when they got here, because some of these riders have come from quite a long way to be here. We've just watched Chloé Charpentier roll around that corner. She looked a bit more confident. We've seen one or two going around that left-hander, Hutch, early on, looking a bit like they're a bit nervous through that first corner. It's a bit cruel, that, isn't it? A left-hander after, what have we got there? That can't be more than about 25 metres or something. So you roll down the thankfully quite generous start ramp, get a few strokes in, and then you're straight into the left-hand turn. It's not much to get up to speed.
It's less mean-spirited than giving someone 100 metres and then a sharp turn. Because if you've got that, you think, well, do I give it what I've got to get to 100 metres and then slam the anchors on the turn left? But this, you basically roll down the ramp, take 2 or 3 pedal strokes, and take the turn. And I think it's some of them, I don't actually think it's that they're nervous of the corner. I think it's just that actually they've been smart enough to say, well, it's not worth whacking the pedals too hard for that first 25 metres. Let's just roll down the ramp, turn left, and then we'll start the bike race.
Yeah. This is Marine Mauge of the Occitanie Cyclisme Formation Féminin down in just north of the Pyrenees, down in the southwest of France. The Occitanie, one of my favourite French regions as well. Beautiful part of the world. I'll remind viewers at home, if you're just tuning in for these French National Time Trial Champs, exactly where we are. The region we're in is the Hauts-de-France. The department is the Département du Nord, the north, right up in the north, right in the very, very north-western edge of France. This race, of course, moves around all the time, but in recent years, Cassel itself has been building a bit of a reputation. It was crossed in, when was it? Tour de France, last year. It was that fourth stage of the Tour de France, the Wout van Aert stage, where he took off by himself after the Jumbo-Vismaization of the early climbs, and that crazy day when everyone wondered what on earth Wout van Aert was doing, all until the point where he won. Well, they actually went across the top of Mont Cassel in that stage, and it's becoming ever more popular now that it's settled into being such a prominent part of the 4 days of Dunkirk as well for the men. Unfortunately, Hutch, I mean, I can speak as someone who lives pretty much on top of one of the most important Roman hills in England. Where do I live again? St Albans. And this hill is a little bit like St Albans in that it's been conquered, demolished, rebuilt, demolished, and reconquered so many times. Actually, when you look back through its history, through my dear friend Wiki, it's quite a pretty sorry story. Not just all the way through the different times it's been conquered hundreds and hundreds of years ago, but even up until, of course, the First and Second World War, where it was such an important point. In actual fact, it was during the evacuation of the Normandy beaches that Cassel itself became a really important battle hold for Allied troops who were holding off the German advance on top of Mont Cassel. And depending on which history books you read, it's believed that actually it's the fierce battle around Mont Cassel itself and the taking of it that slowed down the German advance on some of the advance anyway on the northern beaches anyway. Historians cringing in their seats as I waffle my way through my pigeon understanding of history.
Yeah, well, from what I know of it, that all sounded more or less flawless. There's a brewery on the course whose website notes that their brewing activity started in 1600 and have been halted several times due to war for the Flandrian war on the Flandrian plains. And I always think things like that always strike me almost more than the sort of the formal history, just the idea of something as ordinary as trying to run a brewery. Being affected by kind of raging battles across the countryside. It's certainly been a very war-torn area of Europe.
Audrey Boniol ready to go in the light blue, and she is on, I guess she'll be one of those riders we look. She's on a relatively basic time trial bike, standard clip-on bars there on an alloy bar. we're going to see quite a variety of different positions and bike setup here, Hutch, as well.
I'm going to say a lot of the early riders we're looking at are running what, by the standards of kind of the current World Tour riders, are often relatively basic setups.
Yeah.
One of the kind of curiosities of time trialing over the last decade or so is that it has become much more dominated by the technology. And in some ways, when you watch a race like this, you think, is that entirely fair? Because, you know, when we get to the last few riders, the last few World Tour riders, like Cordor Rago, she will be riding a bike that looked like a spaceship compared to some of the early bikes we've seen. In the UK, they've actually started running a lot of road bike time trials, which you have to do on essentially a road bike. And it provides sort of a different focus. I sort of wonder whether it'd be interesting to see more road bike time trialing in the World Tour and at world level. We see sometimes, you see the early season Middle Eastern races and so on, they run time trials on road bikes simply because the teams don't want to take all of the kit out there. And I'm becoming more and more persuaded by it as a, you know, not something I would want to replace sort of elite time trialing on the best equipment, but it would be quite nice to see it as a contrast or as an alternative event. Of course, we did have the R record for a long time was based on essentially the same idea. You had to ride a drop handlebar track bike, and what would it have been 15 or 20 years where the R record was run under those regulations were an unmitigated disaster. So it may well be exactly the same if you tried it on the road. But there is certainly a gradient in the quality of equipment, and it does make a difference. And most of the women, most of the amateur women we're still seeing, if you get to the middle part of the field, they ride very few time trials in a year. They ride the nationals, there may be a regional championships, there might be a short prologue in a short stage race, but that might be it. And it's very hard to justify the investment in equipment and in time to do that. The elite women here, the best of the pros, will have been to wind tunnels, then have spent many hours in wind tunnels working with the best equipment, working with the consultants. And you kind of look at this and think, well, is that a little bit unfair? It's no different to motorsport or all sorts of other equipment-based sports, but cycling, I sometimes, I increasingly do wonder.
That all said, I do think national championships are one of those rare opportunities for amateurs and professionals to come together, despite the fact that they are elite amateurs and very good riders. And that'll be the same in the French national women's road race. It's the same in the British champs. If we look at British road race and British time trials, which took place yesterday in the northeast of England, it's the same there, isn't it? And I just think it is nice because increasingly there are fewer and fewer of those opportunities for top amateur riders, and particularly in the Race of Truth, as the time trial is, to show themselves and see how they fare as well.
That's right. I always thought of track national championships are probably the best chance to sort of see the whole spread, because the track national championships in most countries will see all the best track riders and a lot of the good amateur track riders. That's partly to do with the different structure of international track racing and the fact there's less racing demand on track riders in terms of race days and in terms of logistics. But it's certainly, the time trial is an opportunity to see that. There are some amateur riders who will take the technology of it very seriously, and it's an opportunity for them to really show what they can do as, in some ways, almost more of a specialist than some of the pros. There would have been riders at the British Championships last night riding as amateurs who would have done very well, because actually they've had the opportunity to really focus on their time trialing. They ride their time trial bike a lot, they go to the wind tunnel, they invest in it. But it has changed the nature of time trialing, because if you go back 15 or 20 years, generally the strongest rider won, and the aerodynamics was almost an afterthought, and aerodynamics has come to dominate in the last few years.
Yeah. We've had a few riders go through the second timing check now. Fastest again there is Margot Pomponnet of the Saint-Michel Mavic Uber 93 in the orange and yellow. She is our current leader at both the timing checks so far. Second fastest through there, Ines van der Linden of the team group Abadi. So two of our UCI team-based riders, first and second there. Third fastest time at the moment, Amélie Ratignier, who seems to have started a bit slower actually. the Leon Sprint Evolution rider. She's the third fastest through there. So I think we're probably about 15 minutes away from seeing our first finisher here. And after that point, I suspect we'll start to be focusing on the finish line a bit more.
There is quite a spread through, because we say we've got two kind of elite pro riders who are already a minute up at that second time check. So they'll be looking, by the time we get to the finish, they'll be a minute and a half, 2 minutes in front of Amélie Ratignier, who's in third.
Yeah, so there could be some pretty big gaps today.
There will be. We're already seeing from kind of first to last at that time check, we're already up to nearly 4 minutes. So there is a big spread. There will be certainly some riders who ride the National Time Trial Championships who probably wouldn't even score themselves as particularly interested in time trialing. It's just the Nationals rules run once a year, and it's, as we talked about a minute ago, it's an opportunity to measure yourself. You want to, you want to put yourself out there and ride. There are one or two riders up there that's really struggling to get off the ramp, which is what's happening here.
Yeah.
Because for some of them, it'd be literally the first time they've been down a start ramp.
Yeah, absolutely. That was Flavie Badot. Yeah, it did look like it might have been her first time down there as well. But it is remarkable, though, Hutch, isn't it? Because there are 46 women here. How many women, I think you looked at the result, what was it? How many women rode the British champs yesterday? Bearing in mind that Great Britain is widely known as sort of time trialling in Mecca of the world.
Time trialling land. I think there was about 35.
Yeah, so let's call it 10 less than this, which is interesting. I don't know whether that says anything about British time trialling right now, or whether it's just that
the other thing I would say is that, just glancing, because I'm obviously co-commentating with Carlton on the men's race this afternoon as well, there are a huge number of men riding this afternoon, and it's a big field, and it's in a country that's not particularly noted for time trialing as a standalone discipline. I think it's absolutely brilliant that everybody kind of signs up, brings their time trial bike and gives it a whirl, which is sort of a little bit how it's felt through some of the early starters.
Certainly amongst the women here, I haven't seen any of the women that are riding this time trial that aren't also entered for the road race on Saturday. We mentioned the British champs yesterday on a Wednesday. The women's race is on Saturday, the men's race on Sunday, just like it is here in France. Does the British champs time trial being earlier mean you've got more room for recovery? And I don't know, Hutch, what do you think in terms of it would be different for every rider, I guess. Some riders, if it's short enough, I'd have thought, would they want it to be a bit nearer to the road race? What's the optimal gap, recovery-wise and peaking-wise?
I think one of the major things it depends on is if you're the sort of rider who's worrying about the Tour de France next week, you probably want the gap to be quite short so that you can train into the championships as close as you can, do the championships, and then you get a recovery week to the Tour. If you're not the sort of rider who's worrying about doing the Tour de France or something like that for a trade team the week after, you would look for as big a gap as you can, because it's your peak of the year. Not every rider who rides the time trial, not every rider who's in the road race is also riding the time trial. So if you do a maximal hour-long effort, say, for a time trial, you want as long to recover after that really as possible before the road race, because it's a disadvantage to those people who rode the time trial. So it depends on that, and it depends on, as I say, if you are worrying about the Tour.
So this is our first starter, Enora Auger, who is coming towards the finish. 38 minutes, and this is a first look we get at the climb up Castel.
This is the third time check, not the finish, I think.
Thank you.
Which is why it's not cobbled.
We're in the lower slopes.
It is at the top of a little climb. It's just over the top of a little climb is what the graphics we've got say, but that looked like it was still on the climb to me. So yes, she's through there. Ooh, yes, at which point the timer screen goes blank, so I've no idea.
Sarah Pope just rolled out for Team L Groupama Pays de la Loire, one of our National 1 teams. Auger has gone through there with a 38.54, so certainly for her she could be looking at 45, 46 minutes, and she's got 6 kilometres from there, so a little bit more maybe. We don't expect her to be one of the leading times. I'll remind viewers at home that we have an outstanding favourite for this race in Audrey Cordon-Ragot, who's won the national time trial title 6 times. Worth me pointing out, by the way, she is getting closer to records that everyone thinks are unbeatable, and that being, of course, one of the greatest female riders of all time, Jenny Longo, who won, in terms of road race titles, she won 20 road race titles. I was a bit surprised to see that she only won 11 time trial titles, but Hutch, of course, that's partly because the women's time trial championships, and along with the French men's time trial championship, started quite late as a national championship, 1995.
Yeah, no, that was
quite remarkable.
In retrospect, doesn't it seem bizarre? And it was the same. I mean, the first, I think the first women's world championship. I mean, the first women's world championship wasn't until the 1950s. Yeah. But actually, the first men's world championship time trial wasn't until 1994. I must admit, I don't know offhand when they ran the first standalone women's world time trial championships. But as a standalone event, they did appear really surprisingly late. Again, if you're based in the UK, you're very used to the idea that there are lots of standalone time trial championships, but it's not by any means a universal. So
Margot Pompanon, who's been setting the fastest times all the way through so far, sets the fastest time at Cassel, the final intermediate timing check, 36:28. And we should see that populate the top left of our screen at some point. There we see Pompanon's times at time checks 1 and 2, and there it is, the third one, 40-second lead over Ines van der Linden of Team Group Abadi. I hope we get a chance to see we will get a chance to see van der Linden as she comes towards the finish. So I do love the Team Group Abadi kit, that UCI kit. It reminds me, Hutch, of those quite the sort of early 90s World Cup leaders jersey, the white jersey with a kind of colourful rainbow. Do you know what I mean? Know what I'm talking about?
I know the jersey you mean. There's something, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a sort of stripy, but it's a bit more, what's that called? Deconstructed. It's almost as if the stripes around the middle have kind of fallen apart around the jersey and they've turned a bit, they sort of run a bit. I like it, it's smart. Rolling out now, Baladine Trich of the VC Moto Montbenoit in that black and pink kit again. We've already seen a few of her teammates roll out already. I'm looking down through the timing check from the second time point outside Steenvoorde, and I can see who was second and third through there. Sylvia Le Glut of Lanester Women's Morbihan was our third fastest time with a 26:46. Second fastest was Ines van der Linden. So van der Linden and Pompanon, the two strongest riders so far, time-wise anyway.
It's been pretty consistent through all of the checks through, and the margins between them have been kind of 30 seconds, 20 seconds at the minute. You know, we're still really waiting for the race to take shape in some respect. I'm looking forward to sort of seeing our first finisher, and I'm hoping we're going to get to see a little bit of this final climb.
There is that kit I was just talking about. Sorry, Hutch, to suddenly jump in there. That's the team.
You've got a real
Abadi
1990s
kit.
aesthetic, don't you?
Yeah, like it. Yeah, I think maybe it's you would that is the kind of cycling kit you would have bought in C&A as a child. In actual fact, I swear my mum bought me one just like that from C&A. You know C&A?
Yeah, well, I would see it. Was it quite baggy?
Vintage.
I'm thinking it would have been quite baggy in that era.
Yeah, hot, very hot, not entirely breathable. Yeah, probably quite baggy as well. Yeah.
It actually is one of the things that's genuinely a bit of a surprise if you look back to racing in the kind of the early 2000s, is how baggy everybody's jersey were. I can understand somebody's jersey being baggy when it was made of wool and it was 1956, but it is a bit surprising if you look back to the Tour or any racing in 2002 or 2003, just how capacious everybody's equipment was.
Yeah. We've made the point a couple of times already, Hutch, you've touched on it, how actually the opportunities, particularly for the women, but also for the men actually, to race a time trial, either domestically or internationally even, is quite rare. I've got a little bit of an insight into this because my wife Leda rode for a French professional team in their top tier UCI teams for a couple of years, and they all got given time trial bikes. She had a lovely purple look time trial bike, and so rarely got an opportunity to ride it, that you after a while you start to wonder, you think, how much time is it worth spending on this? We're looking at the potential favourites today, and we'll come on to them, but certainly Audrey Courdan-Ragot will ride her time trial bike a fair few times in stage races. But if you're someone like Séverine Aurot or Séverine Kerbol, who we think are going to be very useful challengers to Audrey Courdan-Ragot today, in the run-up to an event like this, if your program allows, surely spending plenty more time on your time trial bike is going to be, I know it sounds really obvious, Hutch, but time spent in that position is critical, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You adapt to riding in a different position because things like the hip angles change, the way your weight is distributed and the bike changes. And for a more technical course than this, there's also a certain amount to be gained from just spending time with the bike, because they do handle slightly differently. People say time trial bikes handle worse. I don't think it's worse. I think it's just a little bit different because your centre of gravity is not the same. But one of the things at the minute is there is so little time trialling for women at the elite level. I don't think there's a World Tour time trial in the women's calendar this year. I'm not 100% sure I'm right. If there is, it's a very small number. And as a kind of, as a return on investment, it's barely worth putting the hours in on the time trial bike to get that, unless you really want to focus on this or the Worlds or the Europeans. There are one or two other, standalone representative time trials you can focus on. Yeah. But if you're looking mainly towards your trade team, it's not a priority for them. And it's a pity, because as you say, the more time you spend on the time trial bike, the better. It's one of the things that some of the amateur riders can do, and the riders, maybe when I say amateurs, actually I should be talking about some of the development riders coming through. It's an opportunity to take control of your own program, work on your time trialing, spend time with the time trial bike, and make an impression in a race like this, because you can do it much more off your own bat.
This is that third timing point check just outside Cassel again. Sylvia Leglut going through there with the third fastest time, but even she is 1:21 down on Margot Pompanon, who I'm pretty certain we will be seeing sitting in our leader's chair at the finish. Talking of the finish, we're closing in there all the time. We've got 6 riders now, been through the third timing check, third and final intermediate time check before the finish, of course. Now, Hutch, before we start to rattle through all the finishes that will be coming in thick and fast from now on, I suspect, it's worth looking at that kind of balance, because you had, throughout much of your professional career as a top-level national and international time trialist, a bit of a luxury when it came to national champs. Did you ever feel that amongst the men, obviously, the professional riders who are coming back from just riding multiple, it's not like you didn't do plenty on the road and stage races as well, but if you've had that preparation time on your time trial bikes, all very specific, did you ever think they looked upon you, thought, wow, here's that time trial guy again, it's all right for him, he's had the last 2 months of just locked into that position?
I think they were more respectful than that. I think they appreciated exactly what I was saying. It's something you can do. Good. And they're also well aware that if we go to a road race or a stage race, that they'll be able to hammer me into the cracks in the pavement. So, they could always console themselves with that. I was taking the opportunity I just talked about to specialise in something and work very hard at it and get results in it, as a small-scale bike rider, if you like. But I don't think anybody ever sort of reckoned that it was a bit on the sneaky side to have specialised in something like that, because they could all have specialised in it if they wanted to. They just got more sense.
Yep, more sense.
Well, that's what it looked like to me.
Yeah, well,
it is quite nice. I mean, if you rock up to kind of a national time trial championships in your kind of second-hand car with the rusty bits on it, and you park it beside kind of a Team Sky bus. And there is a gradient the other way as well. Yeah. I think what you mentioned earlier, Hutch, about now the growing number of road bike only time trials in the United Kingdom, I still think could be the answer. You mentioned a few stage races. In fact, I think my first road commentary of this whole season it must have been about the 2nd or 3rd of January, the prologue of the Tour Down Under in Adelaide, where we had that fantastic opening prologue, quite technical, on road bikes, a number of the riders milking the rules of what they could do with their levers and bars to get as narrow and streamlined as possible. But when we see just how popular
sportive riding is now, Gran Fondos, gravel riding and what have you. It just makes the sport so much more accessible if you are riding it on the same bike that you ride day in and day out, or at least a bike that looks like that. It does make an awful lot of sense to me.
I think the bit where you said a bike that looks like that is the one that interests me, because I know at the wind tunnel in Silverstone, which is where a lot of UK riders, UK time trial specialists go to work on their aerodynamics, they have had a lot of riders in there with road bikes. And I almost have the urge to put inverted commas around the word road bikes, because there's a road bike aesthetic to them, but they're running handlebars that are down to 35 centimetres. You turn the brake levers in, you run the bars very, very low so that you can kind of get a horizontal forearm position like a pair of aero bars. And it's not a bike that you would necessarily want to go and ride a 6-hour road stage on. It's not the same thing, so that it's not a pure road bike anymore. It's a time trial bike that kind of looks like a road bike, or a road bike that's been time trial bike-ified, if you like. As road bike time trialing increases in popularity, more and more people are going to switch to a more specialized road bike machine, and you kind of end up in the same technological battle you were always in. Whether the aesthetic of it is enough to overcome that, because one of the things is, you know, we talked earlier about the fact that some of the early runners in this event are riding bikes that are going to look very pedestrian compared to the machines that our last World Tour level starters are going to be riding. The difference doesn't look visually quite as significant, and that might be enough to change the mood of the whole thing. And this is that last climb we were talking about.
That is the steep ramp up to the finish line. Yep. Nora Auger is going to survive, by the looks of it, to the finish line, but she's being closed in on all the time by Ines van der Linden of Team Group Abadi, the first of our UCI team riders, who is, well, she's not going to catch her. So Nora Auger has survived to the finish line. She will be our leader, but for some 8-10 seconds by the looks of it. You can see how bumpy those clinking cobbles are up in Cassel, and we have our first finisher in. And we look back down to see, coming around that corner, it's quite a short one, that hutch, isn't it? It's literally just a right-hander, slightly downhill on the clinky cobbles, and this is Ines van der Linden, who will now take the fastest time at the finish.
It's kind of, yeah, because it's very steep, very narrow, and you just emerge into this square with the cobbles, turn right, and you're there, and slightly downhill, and it's quite a difficult finish to judge, because you can't see it when you're going up the climb, because the climb's quite narrow, and it's not exactly twisty, but you haven't got sort of visual the whole way up, so you're just not completely sure where you are, and suddenly, you know, you're right at the finish.
Et au point numéro 1, donc Léa Bonafous, 26 ans, est passé 11 minutes et 42 secondes, 11:42. Et on a également le passage donc, de Paladine Tritsch, qui est passé 11 minutes et 14 secondes. C'est le 4e temps. On va arriver maintenant.
God, it looks like it levels out after that little arch, and it doesn't. It is a fight the whole way right to that corner, and then suddenly it just rolls downhill over the cobbles, and you're there.
Évidemment, toutes celles qui restent à s'élancer sont autant de candidates capables de monter sur le podium. Elle en fait partie, c'est parti pour Dimitri Pierron.
By the looks of it, we are being given a 4th timing point there, Hutch, as well. I'm sure your mathematical brain is the good doctor, a bit of work out where that's from. That's not the finish, though, either, of Pompanon there. So that 4th timing point must be somewhere on that final climb, I think.
It's the Flamme Rouge. It's 30.3, so it's a kilometre before the finish. So it is coming under the Flamme Rouge.
That is a useful bit of extra data then, that wasn't expected.
It kind of, yeah, it's 1,000 metres from the finish, so I suppose we can see if anyone manages to really lice up the final climb, which might be quite entertaining. Because I was about to say how much use is the timing point in a time trial at 1,000 metres, but actually on this course, it's slightly interesting.
Absolutely. So, Margot Pompanon, having led all the way through at all the timing checks, is our fastest at the finish. And it's a big gap too. Ines van der Linden. Actually, I'm seeing dodgy timing there, I think. The kilometre to go, she was 36 seconds down. I haven't actually yet seen what the time was at the finish line. We'll look for that. About to roll out of the start ramp is Tiffany Lawrence of the British team, Life Plus Wahoo. Changed colours for them this year, having been the Drops team for a long time, using those kind of wallpaper stripy colours. Much changed colours this year. I like them actually, the dark green and blue. Of course, we're edging towards halfway through the season, so you'll be used to seeing them when you watch our women's race coverage here at Eurosport GCN. This is the rise up to that third timing point as well on the edge of Cassel. By the looks of it, this ramp as well, Hutch, is one of those ones, and we're seeing the contrast here between these two riders. The contrast of, do you stay tucked on the tri-bars or do you sit up and suck in more air?
You stay tucked at the tri-bars. Next question.
Well, there's got to come up. Where's the tipping point then? Or isn't there a tipping point?
The tipping point is slower than you think. It's certainly slower than it feels. I mean, I would reckon I'd want to be trying to stay on the tri-bars down to, I don't know, 22, 23 kilometres an hour. It depends a little bit on the speed you're going in the run into it. Is there a tailwind? Is there a headwind? There are other things to it, but actually the aerodynamic component. Here's the thing for you. The balance point at which you are spending more energy overcoming aerodynamics than everything else on the flat happens at about 10 miles an hour, or 16 kilometres an hour. It's surprisingly slow. Aerodynamics is more important at lower speeds than you think. Van der Linden actually picked up 14 seconds on Pompanon on that final climb, just since we've got this time check at a kilometre to go. So she was, significantly quicker up that last 1,000 metres. We may see a certain amount of that going on as the elite riders come in. It's a hard-looking climb, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. It's, I say, it's the opposite direction to the way they'll come in the first time in the road race, but it's the same finish for the road races at the weekend as well, so that will be fascinating. The run into the finish line is much longer, though. They're not turning straight right and hammering straight across the line. That might be a little bit dodgy. So Océane Gauthier, she was our second rider off, just finishing there, so she's been caught by a number of riders as well. We're now getting into the favourites as well. And this is Marie Lenné of the world team, FDJ Suez, as it is on the women's side of the sport. Lenné didn't race the French National Time Trial Championship last year, but she did it when she was 21 and she was sick. She's now 23. Let's see how much she's come on as a time trialist. She's certainly got a very specialist time trial right there, with a cockpit, by the looks of it, all, well, you would hope, immaculately honed to her. Quite a different, if you look at the difference, Hutch, we were saying, weren't we, about some of the early starters with almost sort of late 90s, early noughties style clip-on alloy bars, up to this this carbon setup, which is very much far more modern, far higher, and far more hands to face or face to hands, closing that gap between hands and face far more than some of the early riders. It's almost like a museum of time trialing positions all in one time trial, one race. Yeah,
it is a bit. And also the other thing that it's always worth looking at is width, because the width of the elbows, if you go back to what people think of as maybe a slightly old-fashioned now time trial position, one of the other key distinguishing characteristics is that riders sat a lot wider because there was a feeling that it was more powerful and more kind of braced. And we can see, I think, I'm not sure who's this on the start line now. Yes.
This is Coralie Demey. She is 4th off from last.
Yeah, I mean, she's got a much narrower, more refined looking setup, better looking skin suit. And is that kind of, she's had a little bit of time and the investment and the money and the resources to try and refine this.
Yeah, Coralie Demey, one of the more experienced riders. Oh, I do apologise. Marion Boras, where are we? Yes, Demey is off in a couple of riders' time. My apologies. Boras herself is, you would think, nailed on for a top 10 here. She was 6th last year and 8th 2 years ago, so a good shot. But
broke her tailbone at the Tour of Britannia last month.
Did she?
So she's been injured. She's only finished 4 races this year, but one of them she was 5th in Paris-Roubaix, so she's kind of got that kind of hard-riding rouleur construction. But I think it's a case of how much time has she been able to spend on her bike, and how comfortable is she going to be in the race today. So to some extent, she's probably trying to see what condition she's in for the road race as much as anything else.
We're watching Marie Lenné early on, the FDJ Suez rider. One of the few riders I noticed, Lenné there, possibly because of the sponsors of the team, who is not riding an ISM Adamo saddle. Hutch. Interestingly enough, so many of the riders who aren't riding for UCI teams seem to be on the ISM Adamo. It's a saddle that I rode in my latter part of my racing life as a long-distance triathlete, and I must admit, I've never found a more comfortable saddle than that very peculiar-looking saddle. Incredibly popular, not just amongst the women, but kind of increasingly the last sort of 8-10 years amongst the men too.
Particularly in time trials, you get actually a great view of it there. It's just kind of 2 prongs pointing forwards. The downside to it is you can only sit in one spot. So if you're the kind of rider who wants to shuffle about, it's a nightmare. And I spent most of my career shuffling backwards and forwards in my saddle, so I loathed them.
I loved that. I loved it. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, but it also means you can rotate your pelvis further forward. It affects your lower back. It's not just about the contact points. It actually affects a lot of the rest of a rider's physiology. There are other sort of saddles that do the same thing, but particularly in the women's side, it's, like you say, it's nearly a universal. Yeah,
it really is. It's, in fact, on a couple of those UCI riders who've rolled out so far, the ISM logo on the back appears to have been either removed or painted over, because it might not be an official team sponsor, but an awful lot of the riders using it. They're very wide. I remember when I first rode it thinking, well, actually, I'm getting quite a bit of chafing down the inside of my legs, because it's not narrow at all at the front. As you said, Hutch, it's a massive cutout in the middle. It's fully split at the end as well. Very, very popular. Track riders, also pursuiters. I have seen a few track sprinters riding it as well, Hutch, and maybe that's also to do with the other
thing that it's got going for it is you can put your saddle further forward, because the UCI position regulations of where the front of the saddle is, and effectively the ISM is missing the first few centimetres of the saddle, which is probably one of the reasons that track sprinters use it as well, is because they can get further forward, because track sprinters want to get over the bottom bracket and get into a very forward position, so it offers that as well. We have a new rider in 2nd place at the first time check, if that's interesting to you. We have Celia Lemieux who has come through 11 seconds down on Pompagnan.
Right, so we will keep an eye on her. Well spotted, Hutch. We're on board here with Coralie Demey of Saint-Michel Mavic Aubert 93. She's their last rider out today, and she is in good time trial form as well, Demey, this year. She was 3rd not too long ago in the time trial at the Bretagne Ladies Tour as well.
2nd in GC as well at that race. So she's in cracking form, and she beat Cordorago in that time trial as well. So I think it's quite an open race, as did this rider.
Yep, Séverine Rowe is the only other former champion in this race. She was the winner in 2019 of the Women's Elite Time Trial title, the Cofidis rider. course, that was the last edition pre-COVID. But the French actually managed to hold both of their national championships through the 2 COVID years as well, which is in itself quite a coup. Séverine Hérault, the last person that wasn't called Audrey Cordon-Ragot to win this race. Cordon-Ragot, the rider who's won it 6 times. If she wins again today, it'll be her 7th time, and she will be, almost unthinkably, starting to close in on that record of Jenny Longo. Cordon-Ragot is 33, Hutch, but by the time Jenny Longo took her last title, right, she was 52. Do you know, this is a remarkable thing, of all the national titles she won, of which there were 31, and that's senior national titles as well, I believe. She won the first one in 1979, and she won the last one in 2011. She was, and by all accounts still is, an absolutely incredible rider.
So that's 33 years?
Amazing, isn't it? Absolutely amazing.
I was like, I'm kind of thinking about Beryl Burton in the UK, who did similar things, because I think she won the best all-rounder competition, I think, something like 25 years consecutively.
Yeah.
And never mind the physicality of it, the motivation to keep doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I raced. I had quite a long career, but certainly by the I wasn't anything like that, and I was ready to stop by the end of it.
Right, what can this woman do about it, though? Cédrine Kerbal is on a great year this year, the 22-year-old. Really exciting. If anyone can knock Audrey Cordon-Ragot off her perch, then it's the rider who is 11 years younger than her, riding for Ceratizit WNT Pro Cycling Team. She has been winning this year. She's been really exciting this year. She was a brilliant uphill sprint finisher at the Grand Prix du Morbihan earlier this year, the Coupe de France. I say that because I was on the mic at the time, and I was really impressed with Cédrine Kerbal, the way she rode all the way through the race, and then taking a very fine sprint win behind Grace Brown, who'd clipped off by herself. But this 22-year-old, I'm not looking at her now, we're looking at Chloé Fourmijuet of Cynisca Cycling, but we will look for Cédrine Kerbal all the way through. She's been 3rd in this National Time Trial Championship for the last 2 years. I'll remind viewers, actually, that for the last 2 years, the podium has been exactly the same. Audrey Cordon-Ragot on top in both Cholet and Epinal, and then Juliette Labou in 2nd both years. The DSM rider, Juliette Labou, choosing not to ride the time trial this year, and instead choosing just to focus on the road race. Here is the woman that's won this race 6 times, Audrey Cordon-Ragot, who of course had a really difficult start to the year when she'd signed with ZAF Cycling. That team disbanded, it was all up in the air, and I think, Hutch, she landed nicely on her feet signing for Human Powered Health. It's exactly the kind of team where she can ply her trade, well supported, great equipment, and since then she's really kicked on. Can she take her 7th title today?
You would certainly have to chalk her up as the favourite, because it's, you know, obviously she's won it the last 2 years, and that makes you the favourite before anything else, never mind the fact that you've won 4 other championships before that. And it's a course that ought to suit her. She's the kind of powerful rider who ought to eat this up, particularly this long northern leg that opens, that goes to the northern corner of the course. She ought to be pulling in time there, maybe making herself a bit of a buffer. I would look at, sort of, say, Cédrine Kerbal might be a bit quicker up that final climb. She's got that kind of attack and maybe a slightly more climbing orientation, but I think Audrey Cordon-Ragot is going to, hopefully from her point of view, arrive at the bottom of that climb with a big buffer that she'll have been able to build up on these roads here. And you just look at this kind of long straight road with nothing to break it up apart from the police outrider in the distance, and that's an opportunity into the headwind for a big powerful rider to pull out some time.
Yeah. Talking of powerful riders, Coralie Demey looks like she is ripping along here, doesn't she, into that headwind.
She's in great form as well.
Yes. No sign, I note, Hutch, of any rain just yet as I look at the lens of our camera to see if there's any specks. Everyone is dressed for early summer, as you might expect. Temperature not too hot today. It could have been hotter, and we'd be dealing with that age-old time trialling conversation of, oh, how hot's your head going to be in that aero helmet. It is warm, though, and by the time you get certainly to the top of that final climb up into Cassel, your head's going to be at boiling point. But how close is this to ideal time trialling conditions, do you think? at the moment?
I think ideal time trialing conditions are very personal. Some riders would want it to be. I mean, it's like Sean Kelly waking up in the morning of Paris-Roubaix and seeing it's raining and being delighted, not because he likes riding in the rain, but because he knows he hates it fractionally less than everybody else.
Yeah.
What have we got going on here?
This is Audrey Cordon-Ragot, our scratch rider. Everyone out now, either on course or having finished. Just wiggling out her right hand.
Quite sure what she's waving her right hand about for.
Yeah.
She doesn't look entirely look entirely content just at the minute. She seems to have settled back into it. Didn't Coralie Demey wearing the kind of the ribbed undervest that some manufacturers use to provide a texture? You have a ribbed undervest and then a smooth skin suit over the top of it. It's interesting that she's actually got the ribbed arms of the undervest extending below the sleeves, which from what I know about aerodynamics, I'm not convinced that that's quick. I am also not convinced it's within the UCI regulations.
That's interesting.
But I don't know how picky they're going to be about it.
Can you just explain that to us, though, Hutch? What's the purpose of having the ribbing underneath the smooth skin suit?
The idea, particularly in the arms, is that it is more aerodynamic to have a little bit of texture on the arms. So you see a lot of riders wearing skin suits that have sleeves that have a little bit of ribbing on the surface. They're kind of, you see them, they're striped effectively, and that's actually a little bit of texture running up and down the arms. What some manufacturers do now is they actually provide the texture in an undervest, and then you stretch a smooth skin suit over the top of it. And that provides a slightly different texture, which for some riders is quicker. Ideally, the arms of both the undervest that has the ribbing on it and the arms of the smooth skin suit that go over the top, the length of those should be the same. And in Demey, they are not. And as I say, I'm not convinced that that's quick, and I'm not also convinced that it's within the UCI regulations, because one of the reasons manufacturers do this is the UCI specifies a maximum size that any texturing can be on the surface of a suit, which is one of the reasons they put the texturing on the undervest. But then if your arms stick out, as we've seen, beyond the end of your skin suit... Sorry, is this getting too nerdy at all, Jess? Because it's beginning to feel a little bit to me.
Not at all. You know me. Hutch, you know me. I bathe in your bath of nerdism. I love it. Like, if you think this is nerdy, people at home, you want to hear our broadcast from Filippo Ganna's hour record last year. Hutch was showering me in nerdism. It's wonderful. I love it. I soak it all. You know me, I'm a mathematical numpty as well. So if you mention any numbers, it really means nothing at all to me. That's a nice looking position, Séverine Aurot. She's one of the longest, or most sort of stretched out, isn't she?
Yeah, and length is generally good. You're trying to get kind of that long, flat. The late Paul Sherwin always referred to it as a Longines time trialing shape. That kind of long, smooth, kind of flat back, that bit of length. She looked absolutely super. Clearly a position that has been worked on.
This is going to sound strange, Hutch, but I was working my way through. I tried to figure out how Chloé Formiguier of Cynisca Cycling is off 5th from last, because she hasn't got a particularly impressive record in this race. However, she is one of only 4 riders here to be ranked inside the UCI World 1. No, sorry, she isn't actually. She's outside it. I don't understand it. She was 19th in this race last time and 21st the year before. I wonder if I'm missing something about the ranking of time trialists. I think I probably am. But the Cynisca rider is right up there for no reason that I can necessarily spot.
I can't resolve that mystery for. I'm just looking down the start sheet to see. The only thing, sometimes you get someone who's from a team with a very large number of riders in the race, and in order to space them out, you simply end up with some of them coming in quite late. But I don't even think, looking at it, that that's the case. So I'm afraid I cannot resolve that one for you.
No, I don't. I'm not sure. Someone will know, but I have no Scooby. No Scooby-Doo why that is the case.
We've actually got Marie Lenné is through first time check, 3 seconds down on Boras and 6 seconds in front of our long-time leader Pompignan. So we're beginning to see a little bit of a change at that first time check.
Yep.
Not big margins yet.
No. Marion Boras, the first of those late starters to be through there, first of our late-seeded riders. Looking here at the former national champion stripes of Séverine Aurot. She was the winner in Hay Fouassière back in 2019. Slightly longer distance at 27 kilometres, but still not as long as this. As I say, this is definitely the longest French national time trial championship for quite some time. She was the winner there, ahead of Audrey Cordon-Ragot in second. Cordon-Ragot, by the way, has been in the top 10 10 years. She's been on the podium every year for 10 years in a row. In amongst that, she's taken 6 wins as well, but she's not always the winner. She was second on that occasion, behind Séverine Aurot, who we're looking at right there, and Coralie Demey, she of the ribbed arm sleeves we've just been looking at, was third on that occasion.
Slightly surprising that Cordon-Ragot doesn't have the benefit of a TV bike from the host broadcasters. I assume they're going to bring a bike back from the finish and drop in behind her. I mean, they're following her with a helicopter, and I always feel that shows a certain kind of confidence when they send the helicopter to follow you, but it's a little bit surprising not to have road pictures of her.
This is one of those rare occasions, Hutch, where my commentator's brain was about to say, oh, it's because she's French. And then the other part of my tiny brain reminded me, this is the French national champs. You kind of hope she was French. There we go. Yeah, I'm sure it'll be relayed back to our 6-time winner.
That last climb, the riders getting to the top of that last climb looking pretty toasted, I have to say. It is clearly as hard as we suspected it was going to be. I'm sorry we can't. I mean, they may well not be sending the camera bikes up it because it's already very, very crowded and narrow and difficult to get past. But it's a pity not to have seen some of the riders on it, because all we're really seeing is them coming in, under the arch at the finish.
It is very narrow up there, isn't it, Hutch? That might be it. It might be that they've not got a way to loop the camera motorbike back down the course again without going all the way around the road race course from the weekend. It's possible, I guess.
There isn't on the technical information. There is a diversion sign for doing it, but they may well not be following them up. They may well just be turning the camera bikes, because we haven't seen. There's a very difficult technical corner at the bottom of that climb that we haven't seen a Scooby of either.
No.
Which is kind of a pity, because
tight right-hander, isn't it?
This is through a brewery. Under this bridge. On the left is the brewery of Saint-Sylvestre-Chapelle, which is a very well-known brewery. It produces a very famous beer. And I'm looking forward to commentating in the men's race with Carlton this afternoon, who will be very attracted to the idea that this is a race that literally goes through a brewery.
I want to know a bit more detail, really, on the beer being turned out there.
Oh, I have details if you want them. I'm sorry we didn't see it earlier in the race, because I feel we should really be talking about bike racing.
Not at all. Don't hold it back for...
They produce a beer de garde, which is at 8.5% ABV, which is a very traditional form of beer in this region that used to be made in farmhouses as a sort of a homemade beer. It's essentially a pale ale, but it's 8.5% ABV. It's clearly quite strong, but it's the most famous beer de garde in the world, apparently.
Wow, that's quite some outfit, isn't it? That is cracking. If you're ever going to wear it, it's for the French Championships. I suspect we might be seeing that chicken fellow quite a lot over the course of the weekend. We're watching Audrey Cordon-Ragot heading towards that first timing check. That'll be an interesting marker to see where she's up to on there. Séverine Kerbol, as we thought she might, our leader through there, just ahead of Coralie Demey.
This could be quite a tight look. Just looking at that first time check, a bit early to call it, but I think we might have a very tight little race for the podium here. I think we're going to get. I think Kerbol, Demey, and Cordon-Ragot might be very, very close together the whole way down this course. And it would be absolutely thrilling if it comes down to that last climb, because that last climb is a sudden, literal and metaphorical change of gear. It's a bit like a lot of the kind of time trials we've seen in Grand Tours recently that are flat, very, very steep. And the real challenge there is how you adapt to that last climb. This last climb, it's only a kilometre, but we've seen from some of the earlier starters, some of the swings from that 1 kilometre to go time check we're getting through to the finish. 15-20 seconds has not been uncommon. So the race, hopefully, is going to go all the way down to that final climb.
Hutch, can I ask you a techie question while we look at the wheels here of Séverine Aurot on her look bike, the Cofidis rider? Have tyre widths, as we now track to Audrey Cordon-Ragot, have tyre widths kind of kept pace much the same, getting wider and wider on the time trial bikes as they have with standard road bikes?
Yes, they have.
Exactly the same.
Up to a lot of people racing now kind of up to 25 mil, not quite as wide as it's got on some of the on the road stage bikes, but yeah, they're an awful lot wider than they used to be. It's not that long ago that we were racing on sort of 19 mil tires, so they've gone up a lot, and pressures have come down a lot, because again, time trial tire pressures used to be 120, 140, 180 if you'd got a Silka track pump and could get that in there. Most people now racing at 80 if they're running tubes, maybe even a bit less if they're running tubeless.
Wow, it is fascinating in how things change. And put on Rago absolutely ripping over that speed.
So that was a little bit more exciting than I think she'd planned.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? How the latest advice, information, research, feedback, and trends suddenly become the norm, and we accept them as well. We think back to the days of 19 mil tyres, the theory being you want less contact with the ground, therefore there's less friction, I guess. So you go faster.
I think it was just it looked quicker. They're really thin, so they must be fast. I think that was the entire logic to it.
But if you said to me back then, well, whack the pressure right up, because then you've got something hard that's just ripping across the surface.
And you can ping it and it makes a nice noise,
Yes,
absolutely wrong.
But I also think back to a time, I guess, when the last time I was on a time trial bike, and I can remember being set up on this, I was on an Orbea, and I was set up and told, get your shoulders about sort of same width, your elbows, wider, because not just the stability thing that you mentioned earlier, but the idea being, and the aerodynamics, the person I worked on the bike, who I won't mention, said that the air would pass through in between my forearms and then sort of around my legs and create nice smooth airflow rather than kind of cupping the air in front of my body. And at the same time, you were ripping it around Great Britain, picking up more national titles than anyone I've certainly ever met, with your elbows pretty much glued together at the same time. One of us was right, one of us was wrong. One of us won significantly more national titles than the other.
You're going to answer your own questions.
I'm not asking you a question here, Hutch. I'm just saying it's. But you see, can you see how I quite easily bought that argument? Widen your elbows and the air will pass straight through that nice clear gap at the front. Keep your elbows level with your wrists, and therefore you're just drawing two nice long straight lines in front of yourself, rather than creating this kind of V-shaped cup that we're looking at right now. And actually, even as we look at her elbows are not that close together.
Aero's elbows are certainly slightly further apart than a lot of the other riders. I mean, it is a personal thing. If you go and test this in a tunnel, I don't know whether she's been to a wind tunnel or done any kind of track aero testing, but it varies from person to person. Some people, almost everybody will go quick with their elbows narrow. Some people give away less time by going wider, and it depends on a lot of things, like the shape of your shoulders, the shape of your thighs, the bike you're riding, all sorts of angles like that. So she may not be giving away very much doing that, but you're not seeing very many of these later starters. I don't think you're seeing any of them with the kind of elbows kind of knee width apart, that whole theory. I think you were perhaps the last practitioner of that particular blind avenue of aerodynamics.
Yeah, well,
we have at least now got quite a close race at the top of this.
We really have, haven't we?
Because this is 9 seconds covering up that first 10 minutes of the race. It's not a very big margin. I'm also impressed by how well some of the early starters' times are holding up. Pompignan is still 7th at that first time check, and she's only sort of 20 seconds down, so that's actually been a quality ride.
Yeah.
It's one of the sad things, if you start really early in the race, you don't perhaps get the credit you deserve for it. If she'd started towards the end, we'd be getting a little bit more excited about her. Because she's right in there with some of the riders like Leah Cournier that I had kind of from DSM that I had noted down as sort of somebody to watch.
So as Michael Hutchinson has said, Margot Pompignan is our leader at the finish. 49 minutes and 16 seconds in this French National Time Trial Championship.
And looking good for a top 10 overall, you would think.
Yeah, definitely. You would say, wouldn't you? I expect so. Let's see. This is Cédrine Kerbol.
This is the rider I'm really excited to see, because she's 22. She's getting better all the time. She's been in terrific form this year. I'm she won a great stage at the Tour of Norway on her own. And she seems kind of confident. The way riders just get a kind of a current behind them in the season that they just seem to get better and better and build. And that this year, to me, this is that rider. And I kind of, from the beginning of the day, reckoned that this was, if I was backing anyone, it was her. And so far, so good with that particular prediction. Commentators cursing all that, I mean. But she looks terrific as well, apart from the fact her number's about to fall out.
I agree with you. Yes, it is a bit odd. It's falling out the back of her pocket as well. I noticed, actually, that I think Audrey Cordon-Rago is not wearing a number pouch, using a number pouch, and instead has just got it pinned on.
I like to see a good piece of number pinning.
Yes, I agree. At least this pouch on the back of the Ceratizit kit is mesh. It's not the plasticky ones that shine in the sun, because they're a nightmare to read. That is wonderful pinnage on the back of Audrey Cordon-Rago, old school.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? Neatly pinned all the way around.
You know, she's got a bottle with quite a few of the riders have got bottles with them. And that's Demey, who's got a round bottle with her. I was looking at Audrey Cordon-Rago's bottle, thinking, well, it's an aero bottle. Is it perhaps making the whole setup better? But Coralie Demey is actually taking a big round bottle with her. I'm surprised people are planning to drink in a race this short with relatively relatively moderate temperatures.
This is Demey again, Coralie Demey, who has the second fastest time at the first timing check. Marie Lenné has gone through fastest at the second point. We're starting to see the gaps between our late finishers and those early ones.
And actually, Marion Boras is, according to the timing screen I'm looking at, Boras has gone through faster, but it's not on the screen yet. And to be honest, the live timing we're getting is not the most reliable. So every time I'm always checking myself. No, it turns out to be the truth. Yes, look at that. That's the first time in the entire race that the live timing screen has been ahead of the TV pictures. She's kind of come through, because she was not. She was fourth at the first time check and was 2 or 3 seconds ahead of Lenné there, so she's pulled a little bit out. She's kind of building a little bit into the ride, but she was more than 20 seconds behind Cédrine Carbol. So Audrey Cordon-Rago would have been wanting to build, you know, obviously she was third at the first time check, which is not what she'd have wanted. She'd have been wanting to be first at that time check and building into the second and third time checks before the finale of this, I suspect. And her socks are fringing on the UCI regulation, which says they can only go halfway up your lower legs. I think they probably only just about do. We haven't seen any pictures of a connoisseur with a marvellous sock measuring machine, have we?
No. And these are the conversations that people would expect us to have, Hutch. But you have got a good point. I think it's halfway up the actual belly of the muscle itself. It definitely is.
No, it's halfway between. I can't remember the names of the anatomical points, but they've got an old Etch-a-Sketch pantograph thing that they measure between the knee and the ankle. So it's halfway up the leg. It's not about the muscle, I'm afraid.
It certainly looks pretty long, that's for sure. Next to finish is Julia Aubry of the Team Feminin Chambéry. The red and black of the team, based on the edge of the French Alps. Back on board with that exciting young 22-year-old Cédrine Carbol, only rider in this championship from Ceratizit WNT Pro Cycling Team. This is coming up to that third checkpoint. Celia Lemoule is going to be, well, by the looks of it, 36 seconds down on Pompenon. She will slot into, I think, second there by the looks of it.
So this is, she must be kind of coming into that time check at Steenvoorde sometime very, very soon.
Yeah, so Séverine Herault is getting to the most northerly part of the course. She's actually gone further north of Cassel now. Steenvoorde is off to the east of it.
The course in a minute or two from where she is turns left onto a very, very narrow road. I went onto Coralie Demey now. There's a narrow road that we haven't seen any pictures from. Again, I'm not sure that they're taking the camera bikes down there.
Coralie de May.
She does like to sit in the front of the saddle, doesn't she? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, she keeps shuffling herself back. I'm trying to see whether she is on. I don't think she is on an Adamo saddle.
No, well, she couldn't be, or she'd have
saddle.
fallen off it by that point.
Yeah,
it's not that long.
Like she is very close to banging her knees. I'm not sure that's necessarily by design. I mean, she's a pretty compact rider anyway, so she's on a very small frame there anyway.
Yeah, that's not. She's not doing that on purpose. I don't know what's.
No.
I was kind of wondering if the saddle had slipped an angle or something, but it doesn't seem to have done. And actually, that does start to really affect the aerodynamics. If you shuffle forward, it affects your back shape. It affects the way your shoulders are sitting. And when she slides forward, it seems to pop her head up. I'm kind of interesting to see what happens with the next sort of time checks through. If she's through the second time check with what's this going to be, 17 or 18 seconds on Marion Barra, so she's kind of doing all right.
Looking here,
yeah, she's gained over the first, so she hasn't slowed down for it, whatever.
No. We're looking at the former national road race champion Evita Muzic of FDJ Suez, 7th in this race the last time she rode it. Not
minute
a noted
and 10 seconds down at that check, so I think she's not going to be troubling the scorers. Is that the expression?
Yeah, no.
Seems actually it's a very dismissive thing to say, because that's the glory of a time trial, is everyone gets a result, everyone gets a score, so I shouldn't say that.
Yeah. But I think by the looks of it, her focus will be very much on Saturday's road race.
Yeah.
We have just under 100 kilometres, 99.8 kilometres on Saturday, the women, with those multiple laps of the Montcassel circuit, taking in the cobbled side and then the side we're finishing on right now. There's a cobbled descent off it from here as well, across those clinkers of the finish line, and they basically descend. It's not too bad. They're very similar cobbles to the ones we're seeing on the finish line itself all the way down, but the climb up Montcassel is quite a tough one, and the women have to tackle it 6 times on their circuit, as Hutch mentioned earlier, 13-kilometre laps. That's the same as what the men are doing. I quite like it. I think it's going to make for a really exciting weekend of road race action on the Montcassel.
It's going to be punchy, isn't it?
Yeah, I feel a little bit sorry for the people of Asbrook as well, where the start is today. It's been nice to have a start at the time trials as well. I kind of feel like it would have been nice maybe to do one big lap back through, at least back through Asbrook once or twice, and then settle on the finishes in Cassel. That would have seemed a little bit more fair and made the most of the nice countryside that we're rolling through now, going northward.
Oh, this is we're getting onto these narrow roads I was talking about that we haven't seen. It's not technical, but it's a very narrow, very rural road, and it's I kind of look at it and think, I look at the surface of it and think actually it looks like a lovely place to ride a time trial. It's going to be fast. It's going to be slightly downwind at this point now. So she's going to be coming into a lot of these corners going very, very quickly. We have a time check for Sujin Carbol at that second time check in Steenvoorde, where she is now 8 seconds ahead of Coralie de May. So she's building an advantage there, but we're kind of still waiting, obviously, for Audrey Cordon-Rago to come through there.
That's interesting. Lilizine Mirmont has gone through their fastest just recently. I've just seen Tiffany Laurence of Life Plus Wahoo ripping through there too. Léa Bonafou is just about to turn that right-hander to the finish line. The Lanesta Women Morbihan team rider. Oh, you can see just how like a physical gear change, not an actual gear change, but just a complete change of pace once you get onto those cobbles there. It's slightly downhill, Hutch, isn't it? But it's such a radical right turn.
It just, you turn right and suddenly you're slightly downhill. It's bumping. It's not a pleasant thing to have to do, and you're not going to lose more than at the very most a second or two getting it right or getting it wrong. But it's a very mean-spirited finish to a time trial, which obviously we like to see. It's not supposed to be about having a nice day out.
No. We love mean spirit. Anything that's mean spirit in a time trial.
Cordon-Rago through the second time check at Steenvoorde in second place. She's about 4 seconds down on Sujin Carbol. So.
Well spotted. We've also seen Léa Corigné the DSM rider, going third fastest at that third timing point. So she won't be far off the finish either. Ah, there we go. Marie Lenné also just gone through there even quicker, quite a lot quicker. I missed that number as it flashed up, Hutch, on our screen there, but Marie Lenné has gone through there really quick.
Yeah, 35-30. Yes, so she is. So not giving us split times. I'm going to do the maths in my head, and I'm not very good at it. She is 40 seconds ahead of Courigny at that time check at Cassel, which is the third time check. So that's the one 25 kilometres or thereabouts. So that's, you know, getting quite close to the finish. So it's beginning to take shape there.
Oh. Lenné and Courigny were off 90 seconds apart, so those two have ripped through in the fastest time. We are seeing our best seeded riders now ripping through the times here. Dilizine Miermont also there, 49 seconds behind Lenné.
Marie Lenné has ridden a very good sector there, because that's not exactly technical, but it's a different feel. It's kind of coming into a few ups and downs and things, getting into that time check, so she's kind of found that much to her liking.
She last rode this race when she was 21 years of age, 2 years ago, and she was 6th on that occasion, so a very good bet for that top three. Here's Marion Borat, next of our Saint-Michel Mavic Aubert 93 riders. She's inside the time of Marie Lenné, but that's a zoomed-in shot here as we have her coming to that third timing point. She's going to be just outside it, but very close. This is a good ride by Borat. Very different form to quite a lot of the other riders we've seen coming up here. She's rolling a big gear there, Hutch, isn't she?
Rolling a big gear, staying in the saddle, yeah. It's all about power. Yeah. All about power for her. She's lost time in that sector, though, so you know, it depends a little bit. Is that the way she's trying to ride the course? Is she trying to save something of these technical hilly bits towards the end, or is she just maybe set out a little bit too fast?
Naomi Loma of the team group Abedi. Already 3.5 minutes down on Pompanon, who continues to lead at the finish. Margot Pompanon. We're not seeing any shots of her sitting in a leader's throne. I do hope she is up there. A nice opportunity for any of the riders who lead a national championship. I'm guessing, Hutch, when you were racing, you didn't often get too many opportunities of doing that because you'd have been seeded so late. You probably didn't often get many opportunities, did you, to get in the
no, but I also sat in the first hot seat in international cycling. I sat in the very first one they ever had, which was at the Commonwealth Games in 2006, and none of us knew what on earth this was. And I got to the finish line, and they made me sit in this plastic garden chair under a gazebo, and I had no idea. And every time I tried to get up, they stopped me, and nobody told me what I was doing there. I thought it was some sort of punishment. I was very, very confused.
Yeah.
It's a nice idea, though, and I quite like it when you've got live coverage of kind of the expression in the face of whoever's currently leading. And they give them a TV screen so they can see whatever's happening. It adds another element to it, and I do enjoy it in a certain sadistic kind of a way.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. This is Cécile Lejeune of the Massey Tactic women's team, Spanish team. Changed colours for them this year, much more golden yellow. One of those French riders who races for a foreign team. Right, here comes Coralie Demey coming up to timing point 3. Don't forget she was second at the first check. I'm not sure where she was at the second, looking at that graphic, but she was outside the top 3.
She was third at the second check.
There we go.
12 seconds down in Kerbal,
So she's a good 25. She's 25 seconds in time inside the time of Marie Lenné.
That's the same margin she was ahead of Lenné at the previous time check, so they're now going at the same speed. So Lenné has been building through this ride.
So hard, Hutch, by your estimation, it's all very close, but Audrey Coulon-Ragot, is this going to be closer than it's been in a few years?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the minute, I'm not sure I would be very confidently predicting Audrey Coulon-Ragot to win this, quite honestly. I think the strongest riding at the minute is coming from Cédrine Kerbal. And across the time checks, I'd be saying, yeah, she's who I'd be backing if I could put a bet on right now.
Third in the last 2 editions, Cédrine Kerbol, and still only 22 years of age. We're on board with her right
And
now, or following her anyway.
Séverine Hérault, which is at this, at the sharp end of the field, pulling that in for 90 seconds is very good riding. And it's coming at a nice time of the race. It's just the point where you want that little bit of a carrot up the road in front of you. Because we're working our way up towards that. The third time check is at the top of that hill in front of you. So she's coming into there. There aren't any narrow sections where she's going to get caught behind her when she gets to her. And it's absolutely perfect.
We are getting very close to the tail end of this now as well. We are understandably not necessarily focusing on everyone that's coming in towards the finish, but Margot Pompenon still sitting there at the finish in the lead on 49 minutes 16 seconds.
Although she might not be there for very much longer.
No.
Because we've got Dilexine Miermont through the Flamme Rouge with a fairly comfortable lead that she's unlikely to relinquish 30 seconds up that final climb.
Oh, Séverine Hérault is a long way down on Coralie Demey, despite the fact that Demey has looked all over. Yeah, I think she's not given up by any means. She is absolutely battling up there.
But it's very interesting watching the contrast with Kerbol behind her, just planted in the tri-bars, not getting out of the saddle, just powering up the climb and taking advantage of the aerodynamics.
Célia Lemoule has been setting some good times early on today, but she is still 49 seconds down on Margot Pompenon. Saint-Michel Mavic Aubert 93 rider, who was fourth off from the start gate, set a really good time. And once again, we're looking back here at Coralie Demey, who is ramming herself back up that saddle at every opportunity. But she's still riding rather well.
Well, she's still in second place at the third time check. But Cédrine Kerbol has been through there and is 23 seconds faster than her at that point. So we're seeing kind of what we were expecting and what we were hoping to see, which was a great ride from the youngster.
Yeah, Kerbol, as Michael Hutchinson says, leading through that third timing check at Cassel. We'll see where she is at the Flamme Rouge. By that point, she would be well into that final climb. I agree with what Hutch is saying here. It's a shame we're not seeing any shots beyond really this point at the finish, because that final climb up into Cassel itself to the finish is a lovely one, very narrow. We're watching here our 6-time champion, the defending champion in both the road race and time trial here at the French Championships. And Evita Muzic just coming to the line there, the FDJ rider, former national road race champion, goes 4th fastest at the finish.
We do have a new leader at the finish, which is Dilexine Miermont, who's through the finish, beaten Margot Pompenon by nearly a minute. So she's probably not going to be in the hot seat for very long, but we do have a new leader in the clubhouse.
Yeah, there were 9 starters behind her. She was 10th off from last, Dilexine Miermont, for Saint-Michel Mavic Aubert 93. They have such a strong line of French talent in their team. One of our UCI teams in that second division, the UCI Continental Division, but understandably an extremely strong French core to their team, and they're going to have a very big team for the road race on Saturday as well, which you can see here at Eurosport GCN. Joanna Rousel and I bringing you the women's race on Saturday. All of these riders will be in it.
We have Audrey Corder-Rago through that third time check, 6 seconds down. So
wow.
It is, yeah, it's going to be tight between her and Kerbol for the finish. That's a very nip and tuck race. 6 seconds with the technical sections in that final climb. 6 seconds there is nothing.
And Cédrine Kerbol is about to take 90 seconds out of Séverine Hérault, former winner of this race from back in 2019. She is on some ride, Kerbol.
She certainly is.
And that
There's
is
this horrible bit where you're in the position of the rider being overtaken, where most of you don't necessarily know what's happening unless someone tells you on the radio. You don't know what's happening. The first thing you know about it is somebody else's lead motorbike comes past, saying, "Oh, hang on a second, something bad's about to happen," because I imagine it'll be a little bit of a surprise to her.
Absolutely. So Dilisine Mirmont, the rider from Saint-Michel-Navic-Aubert 93, is our leader currently. Looking at her teammate here, Coralie Demey, who's been rocking and rolling all over the place. Almost like a different sport compared to the rock-steady, powerful, smooth pedalling style of Cédrine Kerbol.
It's what we call a dynamic style.
Yeah, very much
Whoa.
so. That's a tight pass.
She didn't know she was coming there.
No. Séverine Aurot will now know she's there. And Hutch, remind us, what's the legal pacing distance now? Is it about the length of a double-decker bus, something like that?
It's probably a little bit. It's probably a little bit further than that. I mean, the first priority, if you want to steer clear of the Commissaires Roth, is to get to the other side of the road so that you're not sitting behind. You have to drop back, I think, to 50 metres, and then you can only stay there for a minute, 2 minutes. But the first priority to show willing is to get to the other side of the road, because you can repass. If somebody slows down, you're allowed to do that as long as you're not taking advantage. But it can be quite a difficult thing to do, and the first priority for most riders is just to get out of the slipstream. If you do that, unless you sit for a very long time, you're kind of all right most of the time.
So Léa Courigny of Team DSM goes second fastest at the finish, so she'll be inside that top 10. Marie Lenné is going to be our new leader, though. She knocks Dilisine Mirmont off the top step. Marie Lenné, our new leader. Mirmont not in that leader's virtual hot seat for long at all there, as we thought she might not be. Aurot is doing everything she can to use the pacing of Cédrine Kerbol. Visual pacing, if nothing else. Would you say, Hutch, that's about legal distance now?
She's fine there. She's kind of, because particularly that's for short, and there's more than 50 metres between them now. So she's absolutely fine. And in the end, the commissaire would certainly give you a warning. So it's in effect, the rule about how far back you've got to be is far enough to make the commissaire happy, because in a position like this towards the end of the race, there'll certainly be a commissaire. There'll be a commissaire following the last 4 or 5 riders, for sure.
There is something to be said for that. I use the term, Hutch, visual pacing. You're having someone dangling there that you're watching. That has to count for something. If aerodynamics have nothing to do.
It does if you're catching them. It can be different if they've caught you and they're riding off. Right. That can feel slightly different, and it can tempt you into chasing them where you shouldn't, because they're already going quicker than you. If they're going quicker than you because you're not very good at time trialing and you haven't paced it right, then there is an advantage. If you've paced it right, then it can be a little bit more difficult, because there's a temptation to try to follow when maybe you're already a little bit overextended, and it can ultimately affect the position you end up in.
I've got a feeling, Michael Hutchinson, that Cédrine Kerbol is going to win her first national elite title today. She is looking like it all the way out there on course. She just looks so good as well, despite the fact she just caught one of the favourites for the podium here as well, and a former champion in this race, Cédrine Kerbol. We're watching Marion Borat, who's already outside the time of Marie Lenné, who is our leader at the finish line on 47 minutes and 15 seconds.
Very laboured looking up that last climb. She sort of seemed to set out, perhaps set out a bit slower, then got quicker, then got slower, but she certainly didn't look happy up that last climb.
Waiting to see Cédrine Kerbol's time. She has every single checkpoint to her name right now. 3 seconds ahead of Demey at the first point, 13 seconds ahead of Cordon Ragot, who was riding very well at that point. Cordon Ragot at the third checkpoint was second, 6 seconds down on Kerbol. So it is still close, though.
It's still close enough. There's a bike race still on here. It's
very much,
particularly with that final climb, because we've certainly seen this is that sharp corner that we haven't yet seen. And this is the final climb that they haven't shown us. You see how narrow it is, how steep it is.
Hello, something's happened there to Chloé Formigier. I don't know what's going on there. She was fiddling around with her gear shifter, I think. Not sure she hasn't had a problem there. That looked very odd, Hutch. I'm not sure she has had an off there or something.
She maybe she just kind of, because there's a descent into that corner before you go up this climb, and I wonder if she arrived at that a bit faster than she thought she was going. You know, she got there a bit sooner than she expected and went around the corner in completely the wrong gear, and is then, because this is suddenly so steep, it's very difficult to change gear if you're on a steep climb, if you're over geared, and I think possibly just that.
I've seen already this season, Hutch, just how well Séverine Kerbol climbs. She's incredibly powerful up the long ramp. Right, we're focusing here on Coralie Demey. She's looked so ragged throughout this course, but her energy and pressure on the pedals has never eased up. She is inside the time of Marie Lenné, so she's on for a really good time here, Coralie Demey. Demey, don't forget, who's been 4th 2 years ago, 5th last year, and a very good shout at a podium here today. She turns right onto the clinkers. She can see the finish line. And she's going to be inside the time of Marie Lenné. She is going to be our new leader. Coralie Demey of Saint-Michel Aubert 93 with a Mavic in the middle. She is our new leader by quite some way there at the moment. But where will it place her come the finish when we've seen Séverine Hérault come in, who's already been caught by Séverine Hérault, who's already been caught by Séverine Kerbol. And there she is, the former winner of this race, the only former winner of this race. Such has been the dominance of Audrey Cordon-Ragot over the last few years. She also is going to catch Chloé Formiguier. I did wonder why Formiguier had been ranked so highly, and at the moment she's being eaten up by these riders. She's not had the best of days out.
That's a proper British road surface they've got going on there. This is a hard way to finish. Hard way to finish a bike race, and this is Cordon-Ragot, who's just coming in towards the bottom of that climb, or coming up to that sharp right-hander.
I am glad we're getting a chance to see that, Hutch. I was worried we'd go through the whole time trial without seeing it, so at least we know now they've saved the camera motorbikes to the very end.
Oh, so this is tense actually. This is so close.
What has she got left? She's gone down to the inner ring. She's second or third cog from biggest at the back, so she's nearly in her smallest gear and actually spinning away nicely here. This is a twinkly little gear that our defending champion is rocking up here, and now we're seeing much more aggressive stance right up on the pedals from Séverine Kerbol.
There's a lot of power there, isn't there? She's really hoofing up this hill.
Well, it's the first time we've really seen her out the saddle at all today, Hutch, or even moving, because she's looked rock solid all the way through this time trial. Perfect form, seemingly.
Yep. And she's so close. That arch, she shows through there and turns right, and she's there, and she's got, she's a minute 18 of Coralie Demey at the minute, so she's certainly going into the lead. But the question is, what is Cordon-Ragot doing behind her?
Fantastic climb up in Cassel, as there will be all the way through these French championships. She's back in the saddle now, Séverine Kerbol. 3rd place at the last 2 editions, every time beaten by Juliette Labou and, of course, Audrey Cordon-Ragot. Labou is not here, so on paper you say she'd go 2nd if Audrey Cordon-Ragot was to maintain her 7th win, or get her 7th win, but I'm not sure she's going to be doing that. I don't know, it's going to be so close.
Got to find 12 seconds up this last climb, because you're 12 seconds down basically at the bottom of the climb, so she's got to find 12 seconds, and it's not impossible, but it might be quite difficult to take 12 seconds out of Séverine Kerbol up there, because she looked pretty good to me.
Séverine Kerbol takes over the lead, and a big margin over Coralie Demey, who was just the leader for a few short moments there. We watched the former champion, Séverine Hérault, just ringing every last bit out up onto the cobbles here. She'll take a right-hand turn. Where will that place her? Look at the gap, though. Look at the gap to Séverine Kerbol. 2 minutes is going to be by the time she comes to the line as well. She's not had the best of days, the Cofidis rider. We'll see where that places her as well at the finish. Kerbol, our leader, by 31 seconds from Demey. She does, and she has the pedigree to make it happen, Audrey Cordon-Ragot. Right, let's see. Well, look at that. Look at that. She's inside at the moment. Has she got enough when she gets to the arch? This is going to be mighty close, Hutch. She's not quite at the arch yet, and we know from the arch to the line, I'd say it probably is about 30 seconds. She's going to have to really wrap this.
I think she's looking pretty good here, but she's got to get to the arch, and that's harder than we... Ooh.
My goodness me, 17
I'm not
seconds,
sure.
16. I don't think she's going to do it hard. She's got to get to the cobbles, then turn the right, and then we know she's got that rough downhill little run
No,
to the
you're right,
finish.
you're right.
The
She's not gonna
six-time
get there.
champion is not going to do it. Cédrine Kerbol is going to take her first elite national time trial win at the age of 22. The exciting rider for Ceratizit WMT Pro Cycling is going to take it. What a battle by our defending champion here, though. Defending champion in the time trial, defending champion in the road race from 1 year ago. She's going to be on the podium here, and it's just as close as we expected. Cédrine Kerbol is going to take the women's elite time trial title, and there she is celebrating it. What a fantastic victory from a rider who looked absolutely rock solid throughout.
That was a superb ride from Cédrine Kerbol. You know, she executed that really well. I don't know many times she'd seen the course. I don't know how well they had it planned, but that was, you know, a perfect time trial almost, because she'd also managed to pace it so that she'd got exactly the right amount left for that last climb. She never looked in trouble. She looked kind of very powerful up that last climb, and she took more time out of Audrey Cordon-Ragot up there, which we thought she might do, but she paced it well enough to take advantage of her strengths, and actually in the end, that's a pretty decent margin. I thought it might well be far tighter than that. I thought it was going to come down to a second or two. It's outstanding.
So close at the finish. I'll wait to confirm exact times. We will confirm exact times for you as soon as we have them. But certainly, provisionally, Cédrine Kerbol, we know she's our champion, the new French elite national time trial champion, ahead of Coralie Demey and Audrey Cordon-Ragot, according to the timing I'm seeing, down in third. I tell you what, I'm talking rubbish. I'm looking at the wrong. Ragot, of course, in second. Demey in third. Apologies for that, folks. Relaying duff information.
Kerbol
Not
won
the first time.
Audrey Cordon-Ragot was 18 seconds behind her.
Yeah.
So, she took, 12 seconds from that final time check through the technical section. And Coralie Demey was 31 seconds behind Cédrine Kerbol. So she was, 23 seconds behind Audrey Cordon-Ragot. So a tight little podium. Marie Lenné in fourth place, 50 seconds back. And that was a good race.
Absolutely. It was as close as we'd have liked as well. Really good. What a battle by Audrey Cordon-Ragot as well. I'm sure she's far from done. She's been second in this race before, prior to winning it 5 more times after that. So she'll be battling on to.
And she's only 33, and it's
exactly.
It feels like she's been around and winning things for so long. It's nearly a surprise to find out that she's still kind of got quite a few seasons left her, and if she wants to race them.
And there we have it. Cédrine Kerbol gets her first elite national title.
And Margot Pompagnan in ninth, which is kind of quite nice to see for an early starter who was off fourth rider off the ramp.
And Ines van der Linden as well, who was third off on the ramp. Those two riders getting really good rides in early on. Demey rocking and rolling all over the place in the Département du Nord.
I was surprised. I was expecting her to go better than she did. She just never looked looked comfortable. And she,
in a way,
I imagine she'd be disappointed with that.
Well, I just wonder whether it makes it an even more impressive physical ride, because almost everything we saw about what she was doing or having to do on that bike looked wrong, looked like she would be paying for that later on. There was not just a lot of shuffling and moving and rocking around, but the constant lifting and pushing back on the saddle as well.
Yeah, you kind of get used to seeing time trialists shuffling backwards and forwards 20 or 30 mil on the saddle, but she was kind of humping back, I don't know, 15 centimeters it felt like. She really was moving from the front of the saddle to the back, and there must have been some issue with the setup, or maybe she was riding a spare bike or a teammate's bike or something, because there was something wrong. And she's further back in the race than I'd have expected. I mean, she tied with Cédrine Kerbol at the time trial at the Britannia Tour last month, and I would have expected her to be much closer. So that's certainly a disappointing ride, I would reckon, from her point of view. But outstanding from Cédrine Kerbol. Lovely to see kind of a rider in great form with kind of the wind behind them, coming in and executing so well. I
would put Cédrine Kerbol down as a very big favourite for the road race on Saturday, not least after seeing that, but also just knowing the finish and how good she is in uphill sprints from small groups as well. Big opportunity for her, although maybe Hutch as well. Maybe this lights a little fire under Audrey Cordon-Rago after her 2 titles in both the time trial and road race last year ahead of Saturday's road race. She might well be fired up even more than usual. I mean, I presume a win in the time trial gives you confidence, but because she's been second here today, she might have a little fire lit under her on Saturday when they set off.
Coralie Dumais might be exactly the same. She might have had a bad ride, not felt it quite worked. You know, it changes always the time trial a few days before the road race just changes everyone's view of it. And of course, for the women, there's only 2 days now until the road race. There's not a lot of recovery time. Yeah. If you went and rode the time trial today and dug yourself a properly deep hole, because it's taken a little longer than we expected. It's actually a 46-minute ride. It's a slower course than we thought. I think perhaps due to the headwind. You know, there's enough damage down there that you've got to get over it. And there have been some riders further down the field who will maybe have thought, well, do you know what, it's not my day. Perhaps Séverine Hérault looked at it for the first time check and thought, well, it's not for me, I'll back out of it. Here we go.
Let's see what Séverine Kerbal has to say.
C'est vrai que du coup, ça faisait 2 ans que j'avais fait 3e et 3e.
That's true.
Et bah voilà, j'avais envie de faire mieux cette année.
Two times over, the last 2 times.
Donc je me suis préparée bien comme il fallait les dernières semaines.
I've done a lot of work the last 2 weeks preparing for this.
En essayant de mettre le moins de pression possible parce que bon voilà, c'était un
try and put everything in place
comme je
for
dis,
this
un peu la
ride.
cerise sur le gâteau si je pouvais faire quelque chose de bien aujourd'hui. Et bon bah du coup ouais, c'est super satisfaisant quoi.
Yeah, everything seemed to come together today and I'm really happy with it.
Non bah c'est vrai que voilà, cette année j'ai un peu tout changé. Ça m'a fait beaucoup de bien mentalement.
This year,
et puis
I've
voilà,
really
l'équipe me donne vraiment les moyens de réussir, que ça soit humain ou matériellement. On a du super matos, un super staff, donc voilà, c'est très très plaisant
everything's really stepped up with my team as well.
Dans de bonnes conditions
the equipment,
comme ça,
the team support. Apologies, I'm not actually hearing the questions here myself. It's a bit quiet.
C'est clair que ça serait bien de pouvoir faire le Tour de France dans la combi, quoi. Donc voilà, on va attendre la sélection pour le Tour de France et.
Hoping to get selection, of course, for the Tour de France Femmes.
Bah, du coup, ouais, c'est Fabien Rabot qui m'entraîne cette année. Il m'encadrait déjà en préparation physique les années précédentes et voilà, je savais que c'était quelqu'un qui allait me porter vers le haut, donc non, c'est top. Merci.
So her focus very much around the Tour de France Femmes. Don't forget, prior to that, one of the most important women's stage races in the world, the Giro Donne, is starting next week. You can catch that at the home of cycling, Eurosport GCN, prior to the Tour de France Femmes as well. So we're about to go into big women's Grand Tour season as well. There's our top 10 again confirmed for you. As Hutch and I have said, always very nice to see 2 very early starters in Pompanon and Van der Linden in 9th and 10th. Séverine Hérault, former winner of the race in 7th. Delizine Mirmont, who was the leader for a short while, and Marion Boras as well, who'd been setting good times out there. Very consistent ride for her. Marie Lenné and then Coralie Dumais, just 31 seconds behind Séverine Kerbal. In the end, similar kind of time gaps to what we've had over the last few years for a French national title. Here is our 6-time winner.
Ouais, Audrey, t'as de l'expérience. Ce chrono, 31 km, t'as certainement été celle qui a le mieux géré. Raconte-nous justement, est-ce que t'as quelques secondes qui sont perdues par-ci par-là, qui t'auraient pu permettre de remporter ce titre, ou il n'y a aucun regret?
Non, il n'y a aucun regret. 18 secondes, c'est beaucoup trop. Si j'avais perdu pour 2-3 secondes comme ça m'est déjà arrivé,
saying that she's got no regrets. She's been beaten by a good professional rider.
Je suis morte, j'ai plus rien. J'ai suivi le plan qu'on avait prévu.
Finish,
donc non, il n'y a franchement aucun regret. Et Séverine était juste la plus forte aujourd'hui. C'est le vélo, c'est comme ça. Faut accepter la défaite. C'est sûr que j'aurais préféré garder le maillot. Mais je pense que j'ai plus rien à prouver aujourd'hui. Ça aurait été vraiment du plus. Et voilà, maintenant on va se reconcentrer sur ce qui arrive, ce qui sont mes objectifs de l'année.
Et justement, cette gestion, ce plan, c'était d'en garder sous la pédale pour ce final, parce qu'on a vu quand même que tu as repris un petit peu de temps sur ce final, et puis finalement, tu n'as pas réussi à reboucher le petit trou qui te séparait des temps intermédiaires de Séverine. Tu étais informé de toute façon, j'imagine, des écarts.
Ouais, je suis revenu à 5 secondes dans le dernier pointage, et je pense que ce qui m'a achevé, c'est la dernière montée où j'ai pas su en remettre, et voilà, elle a des qualités de grimpeuse que j'ai pas forcément. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, c'était vraiment ça qui jouait dans le final. Mais voilà, il faut des circuits pour tout le monde. Cette année, c'était moins pour moi que les autres années. C'est bien aussi quand ça change. Il y a une nouvelle génération qui arrive, qui tire vers le haut. Donc, franchement, j'ai aucun regret. Aussi parce que cette année, les championnats de France, c'était pas l'objectif principal. Je sors d'un stage en altitude, je savais que ça aurait pu coincer. C'était pas franchement sûr d'avoir les bonnes jambes aujourd'hui. C'était pas la grosse force non plus. Donc non, franchement, aucun regret.
Et justement, le parcours de samedi, Audrey, tu le sens bien, tu le sens mal? De toute façon, c'est une course d'un jour, tout est possible.
Ouais, voilà. Je pense que les 2 fois où j'ai gagné, j'étais loin d'être la plus forte. Donc des fois, être trop forte, ça fait faire des conneries. Donc je me dis que j'arrive au départ seule, avec autant de chance que toutes les autres. Il faudra jouer finaude, il faudra en garder sous la pédale pour le final, parce que je pense que c'est aussi un circuit qui va user. Mais voilà, pas de pression. Si elles veulent aller chercher le titre, il va falloir aller le chercher. Moi, je l'ai déjà eu 2 fois. Ce serait encore du bonus si je l'avais une 3e fois.
Merci.
Yeah, I'm going to be looking for my next title on Saturday and effectively saying, don't see why not. Certainly a finish that would suit her. She is going to have to mark, as is everyone, in those 99.8 kilometers. Let's call it 100k on Saturday. Séverine Kerbol, she is going to be a big favorite.
Aujourd'hui, c'est Coralie Demey.
Coralie Demey,
médaille de bronze. On voit qu'il y a un grand sourire. C'était l'objectif d'aller chercher cette médaille, ou il y a un peu de déception?
Bronze medal, big smile. It must have been a big objective for you.
Je suis contente parce que c'était un chrono très roulant pour moi. Du coup, j'avais un peu peur de cette première partie où il fallait vraiment envoyer fort. Et moi, je suis meilleure sur des parcours un peu plus accidentés. Et du coup, voilà, c'est sûr que je rêvais un peu du podium parce qu'on a eu un premier chrono il y a quelques semaines où je fais une très belle place. Du coup, voilà, ça m'a ouvert un petit peu, donné des idées de maillot. Après, voilà, je fais quand même podium. Je pense que j'ai quand même fait un beau chrono linéaire. Donc voilà, après, oui, je me suis réveillée ce matin en espérant le maillot, mais voilà.
I normally ride a good time trial and I need to be happy with getting on the podium.
Parce que quand je vois la taille de tes cuisses, c'était pas trop galère à emmener?
Bah non, comme je dis, moi les parties roulantes, c'est pas ce que j'aime, je tourne pas trop les jambes, donc ouais, j'ai opté pour le 58. J'avais peur du vent de face, mais au final, non, c'était le bon choix.
Par contre, Jackie pensait que tu allais monter le 58 dans la dernière montée. C'était impossible, tu penses?
Non, je pense que là, je me serais cassé une jambe.
Bon podium, profite bien.
Merci.
Congratulations on your podium. Thank you. She seems happy with that. No mention of shuffling positions on the bike, pleased to say.
It's time for our awards, and you saw the women's race earlier on. It was a fantastic competition as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a super race. I really very much enjoyed it. We were kind of expecting Audrey Cordon-Rago to win it, and actually, she didn't. It would have been her 7th title, and she got beaten by Séverine Kerbol, who's hopping onto the top step of the podium right now and looking rightly very pleased with herself. She, a bit like Remy Cavagna, rode an absolutely super race, and she's getting better and better and better. She's had a terrific year, absolutely super form. Won a great stage at the Tour of Norway. At age of 22, you sort of feel like she's got the world in front of her. Absolutely super.
Wonderful. What I love about the Nationals as well, it means something to everyone who's here, and it's not just it's about beating your rivals at whatever level you're in. You have your own individual targets as well within it, and you also look at the finish to see who you've beaten more than indeed who beat you.
Who you've beaten, where you fitted in, are you a few seconds in front of this rider, are you a few seconds behind that rider, and particularly at the nationals in countries that don't have a huge amount of time trialling, it's the annual check-in to see how that side of the whole sport is going. And there are some people who go away with an absolutely lovely surprise. De Cruz this afternoon, who rolled in 10th, and I don't suppose he was expecting that. He'll have been hoping for a decent result, maybe top amateur. I'd be surprised if he was thinking top 10, and he'll be heading towards the weekend feeling just immense,
with a mighty grin upon his visage. Yeah, phenomenal. So great racing in both events, and as you quite rightly pointed out, Michael, it was really wonderful that they had exactly the same course for both men and women. That's the way it should be.
Same course and same, the idea that we've got the same, everybody's going on the podium kind of at the end of the afternoon together. I feel like kind of a celebration. Do you know what I like about this is everyone who's turned up on the podium, turned up to the interviews, they all look happy. Even Bruno Armorai looked delighted.
He did.
Maybe he was thinking how much worse it could have been, and it's given the whole thing a lovely kind of...
Yeah, it's such a busy schedule, and I think he was just happy that he's survived it, and presumably badged himself up for a tour spot as well, which doesn't get better than that.
No, I see big first half of the season with the Giro and the Tour. I always kind of look at anyone doing that and feel a little bit sorry for them.
That's what they come for. The adulation, the medal, and of course the jersey. Every time trial that she contests, she'll be wearing that for the next year. It's a wonderful thing.
Sadly, you won't get to wear it as often as she should do. There's so few elite women's time trials around these days.
Wonderful champion, and a worthy one. Great battle at the end there. It was the same in the men's as well.
That was an absolute thriller in both races. Just that last few kilometres really was a big sort out. And I think it's in some ways maybe got the opposite result, because I was expecting Audrey Corder-Rago to really pull something back towards the end of that race, and that's not the way round it worked. But actually Remy Cavagna, the big powerful rider in the men's event, did manage to do exactly that.
Well, there's the flowers to go with the medals, and we wait for the men's as well. I might have to...
Do they do a separate prize giving for the best amateur is the next question, Carl?
I think so, but I've got a feeling it wasn't a podium, it is just the sole rider. And he comes on with, you have the pro victory, and then the amateur rider comes on to join the podium, if I'm not mistaken. So you don't have three amateurs, which is a bit of a shame, but anyway.
Dominique Joly, le maire de Cassel, Cathy Moncassin, vice-présidente de la Fédération française de cyclisme, Pascal Sergent, président du comité régional des Hauts-de-France, et Eric Caritou, l'ancien champion. Voilà la traditionnelle photo pour nos photographes. Et puis on applaudit les trois championnes. Je crois qu'on va applaudir toutes les concurrentes, quel que soit le classement que aujourd'hui elles nous ont fait vivre un remarquable championnat. Les plus heureux sont les envoyés spéciaux bretons, ils prennent plus de photos que les autres. Et que voulez-vous, deux bretonnes donc se trouvent. Trois bretonnes, trois c'est vrai, trois bretonnes. Et ouais. même chose. Ah, je comprends pourquoi la deuxième et la troisième sourire, c'est la même région finalement. Trois-Bretonnes et des Morbillanaises en plus sur le podium. Il y a des Morbillanais. Voilà, c'est bon pour la photo. Merci.